Good evening. Welcome to the August 9th meeting of the Planning Commission for the Town of Corte Madera. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Metcalf?
Here.
Commissioner Bundy?
Here.
Commissioner Chase?
Here.
Commissioner Friedman?
Here.
Commissioner Caldera? Here.
Thank you. At this point in the meeting, we open the meeting to anyone who would like to make a comment on a subject that is not on the agenda. So if you've got something on your mind you'd like to say that's not in the agenda, please step up to the microphone. You have 3 minutes. I don't see any volunteers. So we'll close that section of the public meeting that is for public comment, and we'll move directly to our new hearings. So tonight we have two hearings. One is for 5124 Paradise Drive. And I suspect that most of you are here for that. Just a show of hands. Could somebody stick their hands up in the air? All right, thank you. We have a rule now in our commission rules that says at 10 o'clock we're going to check in and see if we're going to want to go beyond 11 o'clock. So we will check in at 10 and see where we stand, and we'll check in again later if we're close to adjourning at 11. So with that said, I would like to introduce this item, 5124 Paradise Drive, a design review and environmental assessment application, DR 15-021 and PL-2016-33 PLEA for a private boat dock and lift at the rear of the single-family residence located at 5124 Paradise Drive. For the record, before I ask for staff's presentation, I want to show of hands of the commissioners. Has everyone been to the site? Yes.
Yes.
Great.
I have been to the homes on either side. I was not able to meet with the engineer.
Okay. So, Bob, did you meet with the engineer?
Yes.
You did. I have. Jennifer?
Yes.
All right. And Nicola?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So we've also gotten a significant amount of commentary since the staff report. I believe it's on the table at the back of the room. For those of you who wish to avail yourselves of it, there are additional packets back there. We will hear the staff report. We will hear from the applicant. We will ask questions of staff and the applicant, and then we will go into public hearing. At the public hearing time, everyone will have 3 minutes to make a commentary, and then we'll bring it back to the commission level, presumably. So with that said, this is Mr. Boyle's presentation to make for us tonight. Please.
Thank you, Chair Chase, members of the Planning Commission. Yes, the project before you is 524 Paradise Drive, design review for a private dock for a residential property. Along with a large packet of emails, I did want to just bring to your attention 3 other items. 2 that are on your dais. One is a photo. This was handed to me from, I believe, the Sanders family. I believe they'll probably talk about that at their when they speak. Secondly is an email from Sue Dury, and that's also in the back for the public. Each
Right.
member of the commission received that via email.
Correct.
And so I just want to put that on the record. And then lastly, an email from Alan and Cindy Sander, not dated, but they informed me that they emailed this also to you folks, to the planning commissioners. This is the first time staff has seen it. 3 pages, 2 pictures on the back. I'm just making the assumption that, yeah, you all have.
I have that.
We have all seen that,
Great.
correct?
Okay, thank you. Just want to make sure we all have that, and this is also available to the public in the back.
Great.
Okay, that brings us up to date with correspondence. So, overview of the project. via PowerPoint the, again, private dock located off of the property of 5124 Paradise Drive. In terms of project location, project is located here, very eastern part of Corte Madera. This is Paradise Drive here. This is Robin Drive. This is the Tiburon Corte Madera border boundary. These yellow lines represent the property lines themselves. And so as you can see, most of these lots extend, the rear property line is out into the bay. So that gives you a perspective. Project home is right here. Dock will come out this area. You'll have a much better picture of it in a moment. And again, gives you a sense of the location of the project. Project summary. The project is composed of a fixed pier walkway, a fixed pier head or boat lift, aluminum gangway, a floating dock, and all those components add up to approximately 110 feet from shore. I won't go into the exact location of that, but generally 110 feet from shore. And height, the height of the fixed pier walkway, which will attach to the house, is approximately 15 feet in height. The height of the pier at the very end of the dock, when there is low tide and there's no water, so from the mud to the top of that pier, is roughly going to be about 16 feet in height. So that gives you, again, those are two height measurements. The plans show others. I imagine the applicant can probably give you more details if you wish. In terms of, this project was not determined to be exempt from CEQA, as majority of the projects that come before you are exempt. This one was not, because it's in the bay, because of the various environmental impacts that it could have. Because of that reason, an initial study was done by a private consultant, Janie Alsep, who is here tonight. She was hired by the town of Corte Madera. We chose her, and the applicant paid for her services. She worked directly with staff in producing the initial study and mitigated negative declaration, which is in your packet. And the initial study, in a nutshell, is going through the checklist, determining what are the potential impacts of a project and identifying those potential impacts. And if necessary, developing mitigation measures to reduce those impacts to less than significant. Ms. Alsep, in doing the initial study and mitigated negative declaration, determined that there would be no significant environmental impacts with the mitigation implementation of the mitigation. And the mitigation is for potential biological impacts and potential impacts due to construction noise. And those are, that mitigation is outlined in the initial study. I can certainly answer more detailed questions if you have about that mitigation, and Ms. Alsep can as well. Other approvals that this project will need to get after they're done with us, if it is approved by the town. The Bay Conservation and Development Corporation, BCDC, Regional Water Quality Control Board, NOAA, and the Army Corps of Engineers. And the Army Corps of Engineers has already actually reviewed the project and given their okay to the applicants. In terms of the site plan, location of the project is shown here. And zooming in a little bit closer, here's another site plan, again showing this is the solid walkway. This is again another solid pier, and the boat lift will be right next to that. So both of these elements do not move. This is the gangway that moves along with the floating dock, which is green. The shadow underneath, and this image is provided by the applicant. The shadow underneath is the original location of the dock, and then it was moved farther away after consultation with the neighbor here. Just one elevation, eastern elevation of the project. Again, the solid gangway or solid walkway, a gangway, and the floating dock. And that's the east elevation. West elevation shows the boat lift itself. And the boat lift is, obviously used to remove the boat from, so it doesn't sit on the mud. In the staff report, I outline the size, about the maximum size of the boat that can be lifted. I don't see it right off the top of my head, but I know it's in there. Instead of story poles, staff and the applicant and Ms. Alsep discussed it and decided that these floats would be a good representation of the location of the proposed dock. These were placed in the location of the various pilings, obviously not all the pilings. This is a view I took from the public path behind Marin Montessori School. I've kind of tried to outline the floats there, just to give you a perspective of where, where this dock would be. The float to the left is the farthest point out into the water. And that's just that first one was zoomed in a little bit more, and this is not zoomed in at all, and a little bit farther back. That's the school building to my right. This is the BCDC path that Marin Montessori has. This is just the location of the furthest out float, and this is a view from Paradise Drive. I actually needed to pull off the road and to the side of the road and took this picture. So that's the view from Paradise Drive of the end of the dock. This is an illustration to try to get you a sense of location of the dock in relation to the neighbors to the east and neighbors to the west. Again, rough measurements that I did from the computer, 170 feet from end of this home to the end of the pier, 125, 50, and 40 feet from those. Just to get kind of a sense of the view shed from the home to the west, because that was brought up in a number of emails. Red lines are to indicate kind of what the view shed is today, without adding the pier, and the black line shows how that view shed may be reduced. Again, going out to the very end of the pier. So make sure I covered everything. Yep, I detailed one thing I did want to mention very early on in the process, before the application was even submitted. Adam and I met with the applicant, the property owner, the applicant's engineer, and numerous county, state, and federal environmental regulatory staff at Marin County. They have a joint meeting where if one is applying for a project that requires BCDC approval and other environmental review. So we attended that meeting back in May of 2015. And then further in the staff report, I outline the remainder of the process for this project. I also want to bring your attention to the materials that the applicant has supplied. The cedar is for the decking material for the floating dock. The plastic material is for the, I'm sorry, do I have that? Yeah, plastic material is for the other, is that for the solid dock, Peter? I'm sorry if I misspoke. Okay, so the cedar is for the floating dock,
Okay.
and the plastic material is for the non-floating dock, where the boat lift will be, and that's specific material that BCDC requires because it allows light to go through, and so the bottom of the bay gets sunlight.
And it will be one of these two
It will be one of,
colors.
yeah, the applicant hasn't chose the exact color, but it'll be one of those two. So with that, just in kind of wrapping up, again, an initial study and mitigated negative declaration were done, and show that no significant environmental impact would result with the mitigation that's outlined. The project meets all the requirements of the R1A zoning district, and staff is able to make all the findings for the design review, and recommends conditions recommends approval with the conditions of approval with conditions that are attached. And I'm welcome to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Phil. So at this point, I will ask the commissioners if they have any questions for staff at this point. Anything that needs clarification, anything you would like any further information about? Phyllis, let's start with you.
I probably show my ignorance when it comes to this type of stuff, but why a floating dock? Why not have a dock that is permanently located at the end? Because I understand there's a lot of noise inherent when a floating dock goes moving around.
Not being a dock or boat expert myself, I can try to answer.
Right.
Basically, my understanding is if you have a floating dock, you can access the water at various tides.
Right.
Where if you don't have a floating dock, you're at the mercy of the tide. If it's set at a certain height, then you can only go out when the water's up. This way you can go out when the water's at from low to high
If
tide.
it goes up and down, does it also go left to right?
No.
I'm
No.
sorry asking these.
No,
questions.
not,
It's not going to go like this. It's only like an elevator.
correct.
Thank you. That answered my question.
Okay, very good. Dr. Bundy?
Yeah, as I went through some of the packets, I thought there was maybe an approval from Marine Fisheries. Was that correct or not?
There was a lot of information.
That may be a
There
question.
was.
I think it did go along with the Army Corps
Okay.
permission,
Okay.
but we can have the applicant
Okay.
clarify.
Yeah, the Army Corps.
The other comment you made was that the height of the walkway was 16 feet. That's to the top of the railing?
The height of the walkway, yes, I know he gave that. Let me just double check. So the height of the walkway from mud to where the walkway meets the house is 12 feet. And then the railing itself, I believe, is approximately 3 feet.
So to clarify, Phil, your comment was that at low tide, the height of the pier above the
Oh, I'm sorry.
mud
Yes,
was that height. So
I thought,
it's not from mean water elevation. So the deck actually goes down 2 feet from the house, that concrete level at the house eventually. But the piling above mud at the low elevation, and the applicant can clarify that for us, I think, at the time.
One final question on the slotted deck material. Is that also going to be used on the walkway and the gangplank?
I don't believe so, but I'll let the applicant clarify
Okay.
for sure. I don't believe so.
That'd be fine.
Okay. Jennifer, any questions for staff at this point?
No, thank you.
All right. Nicolo, do you have any questions?
No, thank you.
Okay, just for the record, a couple of clarifications. You guys did a little research into permits in the past in Corte Madera for piers, and there haven't been any in recent history? Is that correct?
There haven't been any piers that came through design review in recent history.
Correct, yeah. And if you want, we can talk about the piers in this area, and their approval process and
All
whatnot.
right.
But it's been some years. I think the most recent one on Paradise, I believe, was in 1993. Did not go through design review at that time, or even Seaway, I believe, so.
For the record, I'm interested in what is it that can be built on the lot over the water by regulation? It's just open lot space in theory, is that not correct? Or what is?
It is, but obviously heavily regulated by
Right.
agencies, both regional, federal, state agencies. So they really have a lot of hold a lot of the regulatory power over the actual structures that can be built and what can be built in there.
But it's considered square footage of a lot, essentially, from the town's point of view.
It's lot area,
Right.
but it's not actually And I'm sorry, Phil, you can answer,
Yes.
but it's not, for calculation purposes, for floor area ratio and things like that, a lot of the water, the area below water gets taken out of that calculation. So it's not sort of developable area other than sort of for the purposes you've seen
Okay.
out there.
May
All
I?
right. Yes, Phyllis?
What about setback?
There's,
Setbacks are the same. So the project requires the setbacks for the side, and it meets those setbacks.
And the rear?
And pardon me?
The rear setback?
Yes, the same.
all right, well, with that said, I would ask that the applicant make their presentation to us. Who's going to speak first for the applicant up here? So,
Nope. I'm just gonna talk a second.
He's on. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. It does.
Hi. Hi, everyone. Good evening. I'm Brooke Gordon. My husband Huntley and I are the homeowners at 5124 Paradise. In a moment, I'll let Peter discuss the project in more detail. We purchased our home back in 2010, kind of our dream location. We were searching out a property on the water, not only for the views, but for the access to the water that it gave us. We're raising 2 young kids that are very energetic. Our son Grant is 3 and our daughter Grace is 5. She starts kindergarten at the Cove next week, in fact. It's been our dream to introduce our children to the water so that they love and appreciate it, just like we do. I have to say we're a little overwhelmed by our neighbors' response to our project. It's never been our intention to put something forth that would be upsetting to them, but we really just wanted an opportunity to access our water. As you'll see from that, our neighbors to the right, they have waterfront access, a boat lift, and the majority of the neighbors that live in Corte Madera on Paradise Drive do have either a dock or a boat lift. So, as I said, we just wanted an access and a safer access point for our family to be able to utilize our home. And I'll let Peter take it from here.
thank you.
Good evening. My name is Peter Clark with Clausen Engineers. I've met most of you this past weekend. I'd like to first thank staff for putting together a report. I know it's been a while since we applied for this application, and it's been a learning experience for all, and I think you guys put together a great deliverable. I'll get into the project. I just want to say for the record that we're not proposing anything radical here. We're proposing to build a floating dock. It's very commonplace in Marin County and San Francisco Bay, and especially along this portion of the waterfront. So keep that in mind while we navigate through the presentation. So specific to our purposes here, and what Phil touched upon, is we're going to propose the installation of a fixed pier, a floating dock, a boat lift, okay? And it's all for the purpose of waterfront access from the residents. Globally, our site sits on a north-facing shoreline. That's San Quentin to the north is about a mile-long fetch, and we have fetches all the way. A fetch is the distance over water where wind and waves can be generated. Fairly substantial fetch all the way to the northeast, okay? So that's going to kind of dictate our engineering principles. A more localized view, we sit between Marin Montessori and Paradise Cay. The town boundary is right about here, which we'll see on a future slide. The rest of these docks this is all, I believe, county property with a little bit of Tiburon sprinkled in there. This is the picture we've seen. It shows our second iteration of our dock layout. Our first, obviously, was a much simpler structure, went straight 90 degrees from the shoreline out. More cost-effective way to get to any place, a straight line, and that's what we're going for. But obviously, this met some opposition from the neighbors, and in spirit of playing with the neighbors and trying to find a solution that would meet their expectations, we doubled the distance from the property line to 40 feet at the terminus as opposed to 20 with this angular approach here. Now, I just want to go over what we're proposing. We have, in sectional view, we start out at the shoreside abutment at elevation plus 12. Okay, that's elevation datum of mean lower low water, 12 feet above the zero tide line. And that's because that's where our existing concrete pad is. We have a 1-on-12 slope down to this point where we reach an elevation of plus 10. Now, we'll see that from an additional slide, but just to have in the back of your head, this is more or less where the neighboring property starts. So the neighboring waterfront home starts right about where the elevation of the pier drops down to plus 10. Then we have our our boat lift, our aluminum boat lift. We have our aluminum gangway, and our floating dock here. Now, there's been some conversation about plus 16, plus 15. When we're talking about elevations, we're talking about relative to a datum. And in this datum, it's the mean lower low water datum. There's zero water. So the average lower tide each day is zero. Now, if we go up from there, the top of the piles is elevation 14. Approximately 15 feet above mud line would be the distance from the mud line to the top of the pile, not the elevation of the top of the pile. It's a concept, but that's something we need to bear in mind. We're not talking something that's 2 feet above where it actually is. To give you a little bit more perspective on where this shapes up with respect to the property lines and the neighboring residences, as said before, our original proposal was straight out here, respecting a 20-foot offset from the property line. Now we respect a 40-foot offset from the property line, a greater offset, obviously, from this property line. I'm going to hold on explaining why this is the only alternative we would really consider and have been considering, because we really need to look into the photos of how the house is set up. But for the point of discussion here, this is what we propose. This meets the expectations. It provides sufficient water depth. It extends out into, we'll call it deeper water, but we won't call it deep water. To get a little bit more involved in the specifics here, this is a 4-foot wide pier access way. Okay, it's a pier, but it's 4 foot wide. If we look into neighboring piers, for the most part, their piers are 6 foot wide. So in meeting resource agency approval, it has to meet, is this the minimum necessary to provide its goals? And we believe a 4 foot wide walkway is the minimum necessary to provide its goals. Now, then we bump out into a 12 foot wide pier head, and the reason for that isn't to form a large entertainment space, it's actually to support the boat lift. If we can imagine, the boat lift has piles, but it wouldn't stand on its own. It needs to rest against a foundation, and the foundation is the 12 foot wide surface of the pier head. Down the floating dock, and then down to a floating dock, which is sized appropriately, we believe, to account for that fetch, which I discussed before, that 1.5 to 2.5 mile fetch to the north and northeast. Every day, we get waves from the ferries. I believe it's 20 some odd times a day back and forth. During winter storm, we get wave buildup, wave setup. We need to provide a structure that will have a long-lasting effect. We don't want to provide something that's a throwaway. So just to reiterate, here's our pier walkway, here's our pier head, our lift, our gangway, and our float. Now let's take a walk through the neighborhood here, and these are, we can go all the way along the shoreline, but I want to concentrate on houses and residences within the town of Corte Madera. So we start at 5090, where there's a large residence here. This is a pier that extends out into the water with a boathouse. We move down the road, there's a residence, a large pier, and a large floating dock. We have a complete residence over the water line. And when I say over the water, I mean anything seaward of mean high water. That's the definition we'll use. We have our site. We have 2 homes without any type of waterfront infrastructure. And then we have 2, this has I stand corrected, that is not a lift. That's a sunfish on a rack, but there's a boat lift and a floating dock with a pier head and an access pier. An access pier, a pier head, and a floating dock, I believe. So that's our neighborhood. So water depths is something we've seen in the packet being discussed ad nauseum, I believe. We are not hiding the fact that we are adjacent to a tidal flat. Now you can see our site here. The tidal flat it's on the order of maybe 200 feet. Here's our property line somewhere out here. It extends further as we go west, and it narrows as we go east. I would approximate that pink line. Oh, by the way, the green line is mean low or low water. That's 0 water, the lowest of the average tides. Here's our yearly low. Say that's -2. Now, bear in mind, I'm approximating based on some site measurements, but I believe this to be very accurate. Here's our mudflat. Now, notice the docks that encroach out into that pink line, approach that pink line. The reason for that is simple. They're trying to achieve a usable structure, something that they can access the water. We have a floating dock here. You know, floating dock here, that float is going to stay floating most of the tidal cycle. Most of the tidal cycle, with the exception when the tides go to these king tides, but king tides on the low end, where we'll have a -2. Extends past mean low water. Our dock extends roughly between mean low water of 0 and -1. Here's a little bit better view showing the immediate neighbors. And there's us. Notice here we have a 6-foot wide pier accessway, a head, a gangway, a float, a boat lift. Very similar to what we're proposing on this site. And our encroachment is very similar to what their encroachment is. If you notice, the shoreline bends inward. So if we look at the extension out, we're within ballpark. It's almost too close to call. Here's an overlay of our structure. Again, the encroachment out is very similar to what we see here at 5156. Not as far out as we see over here at 5100, obviously. And here's our boat shed. A little bit better view. So Commissioner Metcalf asked about setbacks. Here's our setback requirements, typical R1A setback requirements. Front yard wouldn't be applicable here. Side yards of 10, rears of 25. Now, if we look at our setbacks, we could make the argument that 25 foot would be the closest point. But in reality, when we're really looking at setbacks, we're trying to maintain an offset from an adjacent parcel or adjacent property. So at 42 feet would be the pier head. At 40 feet would be the setback from the floating dock. Now, on the opposite side, we're at 66 and 82 respectively. So we can see where we balance out towards the center of the site, not in the immediate center, but out closer to the center versus what we had originally proposed. Now, as a point of comparison, because we have to maintain some level of consistency here, this should read 5164, I'm sorry for the typo. If you can see that on your screen, that's 7.29, and that's very much this is through Marin Map GIS mapping system, so it's within a degree, but 7 plus or minus feet to that property line. Now, granted, this is a very small parcel, and I'm sure this dock was built prior to anyone's involvement as far as we are here, but it just goes to show where this particular dock within the neighborhood sits relative to the property lines. That neighbor, again, 5156 Paradise, is pretty much situated in the center of the parcel at 10 plus or minus, 11 plus or minus. But note that the parcel doesn't extend as far seaward as ours does. And here's our neighbor, again, 5116. That's almost too close to call. And obviously, this is a structure built prior to any type of, we would believe, any type of setback requirements. But that's how close we are to this property line there. The name of the game right now, where everyone's very much opposed to this project, is concerns for view corridors, and we understand that. The reason why my client purchased this house was because of the views, and I'm sure that's the reason why most of the applicants' neighbors in this vicinity also bought their homes, and we respect that. But I want to make sure we're looking at this from the same direction, same kind of perspective. Now, to come back to our elevations, we have a pier deck elevation when it gets to its steady state at plus 10 mean low water, mean low or low water. We have a railing height, which meets code. It's a 42-inch guardrail. Then the top of that railing is 13.5. Our boat lift, which we'll see in a moment, the top of the boat lift will be also at 13.5. And then lastly, the floating dock piles are a little bit taller, and I'll tell you why they're a little bit taller in a moment, at plus 14. Now let's backtrack and look at try to interpolate what the elevation of this home is, because it really makes sense when you're thinking about how is this going to impact our views to Mount Tam? That's the $1 million view, correct? I took a measurement off the water line, which the water there's a NOAA site, tells you exact elevation of the water every minute of the day, and interpolated that this is at elevation 10.6. This is probably a 42-inch guardrail if it's built to code, and this window looks like it's right about the same elevation as that rail there. So we kind of determined that that's plus 14.1. Now, I'm not saying it's when you look out that window that this dock would be invisible, but what I am trying to say and what I'm trying to bring to light here is that it will not be in the middle of Mount Tam or in the middle of San Quentin or the middle of the bridge from a neighbor's home. It's very important that point be kind of discussed here relative to the project. Now, what would the neighbors be looking at and the applicant be looking at which built? So let's walk through what we have here. This is a dock we recently constructed on West Shore Road in Belvedere. These are cedar posts at 4-foot centers with a stainless steel cable railing intermediate system. Now, the photo's a little grainy, but it's very difficult to see through or have any prevention of your view through these cables. From a distance, they look nearly invisible. Here's the boat lift, which I'm sure not many people are familiar with. This is an aluminum framed boat lift. It has 2 piles that go down in the water, but see how it's tied to that pier? This pier has the same exact dimensions as the one we're proposing here. The motors would top out at the railing height, so they wouldn't be in the way as far as an eyesore. The boat capacity is 5,000 pounds. I know Phil was looking for what type of boat this would meet. This would probably be about a 22-foot runabout, an outboard boat. And it's run by an electric motor system, so it's relatively quiet. Now, the floating dock is something of concern, and I've seen floating docks. I'm privy to floating docks. I know they make noise. They don't have to make noise. And I'm going to tell you a couple things why this particular proposed structure will be quieter than what people may be accustomed to. Okay, first off, it's a cedar glulam construction. There's no treatment, there's no painting, there's actually no major brackets or structures holding this together. It's the glulam beam itself laid flat. Each corner of this dock will be held in place by a pile. That'll be a steel pile with a plastic sleeve around it. The pile keep, or the pile guide, will be adjustable so it fits firmly around the pile guide. There won't be any play. The reason why floating docks are loud and noisy is because they clang around within a pile keep. We've designed a system that has a UHMW, a high molecular weight plastic that goes around this plastic sleeve. It's relatively soundless. Here's our gangway. This particular gangway does show that slotted deck material that we have here, and we are open to colors suggestions. There's a gray and there's a brown. They're pretty much the same to me, but I'm sure there's some opinions in the gallery. The second major concern is privacy. Now, the purpose for this is not to have an entertainment space. In reality, it's to access the floating dock and to access the boat lift. The pier head is sized in a way, like I said, to account for the loads of the boat lift. The pier head doesn't have any panels on it. You see a lot of homes with waterside decks that have glass panels, enclosures that prevent wind from getting in there. It makes it a much more enjoyable surroundings. As we all know, it's very, very, very prohibitive to stay out there in the elements without a down jacket on at all times. I'm not saying we're Raccoon Straits, but still, this won't be a congregation. The point is, it's not an extension of a living room. We would recommend, as a condition of approval, that there be no permanent storage of furniture, umbrellas, sitting equipment, that type of equipment on the pier head to make sure it stays as a point of egress to the boat lift, to the floating dock. Now, this photo was taken at a 1.5 plus 2 tide somewhere in that neck of the woods from a kayak looking back at the neighbor to the west. Now, this would be at floating dock level, say. It's hard to draw a conclusion that I can affect the privacy of this home while I'm sitting on this floating dock. If we look from this side the same way, this is the sun porch. Here's the residence. Again, this is at the floating dock level. Now, one of the commissioners brought up the point, explain to us why there is no other alternative for siting this pier in the location, in an alternative location, and I'll tell you why. The shoreline is composed of riprap stone. This is the reason why the house can stay here. This isn't a solid wall. This doesn't reflect waves back. This dissipates waves and prevents this place from getting washed out every time you get a big winter storm. And I'm sure the majority, there's the neighbor here has one, the neighbor here has one, and so on down the way back towards the east. It would be very difficult to bring a pier out along the parallel to the shoreline in this area and then take a 90-degree turn at the middle of the property to go out. The question had been arose, why don't we site this directly in the center of the property line? For this reason, it would be very, very difficult. And if we said, we'd say, you know what, let's rebuild the revetment and go ahead and propose that, the agencies would, it would be DOA as far as I'm concerned, proposing something like that. So we feel like what we've proposed here for this particular reason, and there's several others, is the only possible alternative for this project. Here's the access from looking at the house from the floating dock location. This would be the left side. This is where we would access from construction and then access from the recreational use. Alternatively, this is the opposite side of the property. It's a riprap slope up to about this elevation and then has a substantial thicket of briars there, blackberry bush. There's no point of egress from the home where this point would be ideal for accessing the pier. And that concludes my presentation. I hope I answered enough questions. If you have any more questions, I would be more than willing to address those.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Stay right there.
Yeah.
So, Phyllis, we'll start
Yes.
with you.
Two questions. One is just one of curiosity. The acronym NOAA, what does it stand for?
National Oceanographic Atmospheric Administration.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to ask a little bit about the glulam beams.
Sure.
Because that's something I'm familiar with. And they could be very good and they could be very dangerous. What experience do you have with the sealant on those beams so that the water, in this case, does not get in between because it becomes almost like a cottage cheese inside if that glue starts deteriorating where it's holding the layers together?
That's a great question. We specify Alaska yellow cedar first because it's got a higher oil content and it particularly withstands the elements a lot better. My firm, this is glulam beam dock construction, is something that I'm new to for the last 4 years. It's something that's been very popular here. I'm not a West Coaster, I'm from the East Coast. But to give you one anecdotal story, when I moved out here, we designed all the docks for the America's Cup. That included the super yacht dock at Pier 27 where the ferry terminal is now.
Mm-hmm.
We built the same dock we're proposing here for that facility.
With the glulams?
With the glulams, correct. Now, if you can imagine, this site is very much a mill pond compared to what we had over at Pier 27. Plus, we're not tying Larry Ellison's super yacht up to this particular dock. It's a little bit of an anecdote, but it tells you that this is what we're proposing, and this is the level of security we find with this floating dock to put in an exposed location.
But so many years later, after the America's Cup, what do you know about the condition of those glulam beams in the dock?
Very good. In Brickyard Cove, over in Point Richmond, there's glulam docks that have been there for 30 years.
Okay, all right. So in other words, it's the proper sealant
Correct.
with anything else. Okay, thank you.
All right.
That's it.
Dr. Bundy, any questions for Mr. Clark?
Yeah, Peter, when I was out there and looked at the takeoff point and looked at how you had tried to move the dock over to not impact the Sanders, I wondered if it could be moved over a little further or have that decking that is adjacent to it reworked to accommodate a new deck going out that would then move the whole thing more towards the center of the property. It also occurs to me that maybe having access to the dock from the upper level of the property may not be the most ideal for recreational use, and that deck could be reconfigured or potentially reworked to allow access, as well as a takeoff point.
Now, just to make sure we're talking about the same thing, are you speaking of the deck that's kind of a half level up
Yes.
from where we are? We thought about that, and that's a bedroom there, and we'd rather have, from a logistical standpoint of say you're bringing your paddleboard or your kayak down to the pier, having that access streamlined from the side of the house where there's a step stair, or concrete steps, down through rather than going back up and out. From what we have now, without doing too much construction on the home, we feel like the skew angle, is the maximum that we can go without getting very aggressive and having to drive an extra couple piles. The goal here is to maintain as limited pile driving as possible because of how the resource agencies will interpret this. We always, in the back of our head, we always want to balance between what is acceptable at the town level versus what is acceptable at the local, regional, and federal level. And the federal level, they're very particular about the number of piles that you're going to drive, how impactful that would be, how much bay fill is going to be, bay fill being square footage. So minimizing square footage and minimizing the amount of piles is their purview. And we feel like what we have here does that.
Yeah, I wasn't aware that that was a bedroom. But in sort of looking at the whole issue of where this could take off from, was there a thought given to coming down the side and connecting to that deck to go off to the walkway, recognizing that, you wouldn't want to use the bedroom to store your, stand-up paddle boards and such?
I don't know, they seem they really like paddleboarding. So. I think that, I think the driving force there is the height difference. We would probably be starting somewhere around elevation plus 16 and having to come down, I misspoke, it's probably somewhere in the plus 14 area. But it would be a fairly steep drop because we really do want to bring it down to plus 10. We feel like at plus 10, we're at the FEMA flood stage, the base flood elevation. Any lower than that, we really couldn't stand by a design. Any higher than that, it really starts to impact view corridors. So being able to start from a lower slope, or lower elevation and slope down on a more mild slope, we really feel is the most appropriate use here.
Okay,
All right, is that it, Dr. Bunny?
yes.
All right. Jennifer, please ask some questions of the
Thank
engineer.
you for your presentation. Can you expand a little bit on the length, the 110 feet, and how that came about? I know you mentioned the agencies dictate the number of piles and the minimum or maximum, I guess, square footage of the entire structure, but why is it not, 130 feet or 100 feet, whatever
Yeah, no, that's a
else
great,
could have been considered?
that's a great question. If we can, maybe we should just review and go back. The shallow water condition really dictates where we want to go, okay? If we had an unlimited budget, and I saw one of the emails mentioned the Berkeley Pier, you would build the Berkeley Pier here, if you could. Because you would be in deep water all the time. We don't have an unlimited budget. We don't want to build something that extensive, but what we do want to do is find ourselves in water where the float will be floating every day. Not every day, all day, but we'll be floating the majority of the time because that makes it usable. And the 110 foot is the distance seaward of the mean high tide line, which is right along that riprap slope. So where we cite it here, the pier and the floating dock, this is about elevation -1. So at low tide, when the water line's right about here, we have about a foot of water at the dock. Conversely, at high tide, we have a 6 feet at the dock. The further we go out, we found that it was kind of the law of diminishing returns. We could go out another 100 feet and really gain about 6 more inches of depth, of water depth, because that mud flat is very shallow in its slope.
So would the agencies have allowed, obviously you have the rear setback issue, but you're still such a far distance away from that. Would they have allowed you to do twice as, yeah? Or,
Likely not.
Okay.
BCDC has a 1,000 square foot threshold where they can review a permit administratively.
Okay,
It's a much better process to do it administratively versus going to the commission.
okay.
It's pretty tough process. So, and when we went to the general meeting that Phil mentioned at Marin County, there was concern with how often is this dock going to sit on the mudflat? And we were able to address that. The Army Corps has signed off on the project. There was a question on that. NOAA Marine Fisheries, which is a part of NOAA that the Corps consults with, approved the project as not being adversely affecting essential fish habitat. So from their perspective, from the professionals' point of view, in respect to environment, this does meet that requirement, and this will be usable. That's really the point, is to be usable, but
Right,
within
right.
budget. I mean, like you said, our property goes way out here,
Right.
but that would just be unrealistic.
And how many times a day right now do you think the floating dock will be sitting on mud? Twice a day, you said?
The floating dock, we've assessed that the floating dock is at -1. So let's just always look at that. At zero tide, we have a foot of water in this area.
Okay.
The floating dock has 8 inches of draft, so at the water line, there's 8 inches below. So it'll probably sit on the mud maybe once a day. But you got to bear in mind that the tide always doesn't go down to -1 or 0 every day. It follows a curve that it changes every day.
Right.
And there's one lower tide and one not as low tide.
And then, thank you. The other question that I had was just on all the materials that are being used with the steel piles and all the wood and everything, and the aluminum. I assume that all those materials are reviewed and approved by the state agencies as well.
Correct, yes. So everything we have here is inert. The piles, you kind of have the option. You wouldn't put just an uncovered steel pile in the marine environment. It'll rust out very quickly. So instead of painting that with an epoxy paint, which will wear off, we would propose putting the steel pile into the ground, into the mud, and then driving a plastic sleeve, a 1/2-inch plastic sleeve around that. What that does is 2 things. It inhibits corrosion, and it also provides a little bit of a sound barrier from what we discussed as the clanging back and forth of the floating dock.
Okay, thank you.
It'll stay black forever. You know, some piles get unsightly when they're left unchecked. They become just rust buckets, and this won't happen here.
Thank you.
All right, Nicolo, your questions for...
Sure. Peter, first of all, you had a great presentation, really, really well done. And I had 2 questions. One has been partially answered already. And so you, in your professional opinion, you would not recommend or even want to build a system like this any shorter than the one you're proposing?
No, actually, I wouldn't. You know, I think the Gordons want to be able to use this as much as possible. And in order to use this, it needs to float, it needs to be in the water. Now, we're not talking about the boat lift. And the boat lift, it's not going to be used all the time. And we understand that, and my clients understand that. But we feel like it's a compromise between extending it further out to be able to maximize its use all the time versus what would be perceived as acceptable from this level and the next round of agency approval.
Got it.
Does that
No,
answer your question?
Yeah, sure. If you were to reduce the length, would that have any negative effect on the adjacent property in terms of waves?
No, we discussed this internally, and I put together some information in your packet, kind of addressing how this structure would affect a wave climate, for instance. And waves are really affected by solid structures. For instance, if what we saw there in gray went all the way down to the water as like a curtain, waves would be able to bounce off that and reflect and affect the coastal processes at the neighboring home, and all the way down the shoreline, most likely. But since this is an open cell structure, realistically, we can count the piles. There's 2 there, there's 2 there, there's 2 there, there's 2 there, there's 2 there. If you add up that square footage and you have a wave coming in this direction, it's going to go right through those piles. The roundness of the piles, they're hydrodynamic. So it won't really affect any kind of the wave climate in this area at all.
Got it. And then, this is the difficult one.
Uh-oh.
Would it be possible to move the entire system, I'm calling it the system, the whole thing, more towards the center, obviously keeping the point of entry where it is, and therefore increasing the pier walkway, I suppose, enough to then move, to
Yeah, no,
changing the,
I think you're saying if we skew this angle
yeah,
more aggressively,
yeah. Would
How
that be
much space?
feasible economically? Would it change incredibly the project? And
it depends. And it depends on one thing. The amount of angle we skew this, obviously we're increasing the length the more we skew. If we want to maintain this as our terminus, that line there, we have to skew this over here and out. This line gets longer. I would say it would be a case-by-case basis, but we could probably skew this maybe 1 or 2 more degrees and move this over maybe 5 foot maximum without getting to the point where we're driving more piles. What I really want to avoid is driving more than 1 pile through this riprap, because it's going to be very time sensitive. It's going to increase construction time, which we think that we can drive piles within 3 to 4 days. If we have to drive a second pile in this area, that's probably going to be several days and several thousands, tens of thousands of dollars just to do that. So to answer your question, do I think we can move it over? Yes, but it would be potentially 5 feet.
okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nicolo. Phyllis, before I ask my questions, I'll go to you, because you said you
Okay.
had a couple more.
Yeah, just 2. In looking at one of the photographs I took, there's an old, it looks like part of a pier, kind of near where you're going to, right. I'm assuming you're going to get rid of that, remove that?
You're correct. That goes away. Thank you for asking that question, because
Yes.
that's something that got away from me. That is an old, Brooke can probably expand on it. I think it was there, it definitely was there when they moved in, but there's a concrete abutment there. That's what you see in that
Yes.
rectangular shape.
Mhm.
And there's a wood gangplank, essentially, that goes
Right.
out into that.
That's coming apart.
It's coming apart. As part of our mitigation proposal, we would remove that, and that would offset our increase in bay fill. So to answer your question, yes.
Okay. And my other question has to do with the actual construction. The piles are going to be driven through the mud, but there's still going to be vibrations, and I'm talking about the construction, not permanently once they're there. As part of the construction, the vibration of the digging, and I may be using the wrong terminology, and I
No,
apologize if I am.
you're right on.
That it's going to be affecting the water, the waves almost like concentric circles working out
Yes.
from where you're drilling. Can that have any effect on the house next door, since that itself is on piles?
I'm going to walk you through the process of the installation, because I think we should start there, and then we can talk about whether or not
Okay.
it's going to affect it. So there's 2 ways to install a pile. In this area, bay mud, that's what we're dealing with here. You can drive a pile with an impact hammer, which is essentially a weight dropping down on a pile head, and it drives the pile down, and it's very noisy and loud.
Oh, yeah.
Or there's a vibratory method, where a large mass clamps down on the top of the pile and vibrates that pile into place. Okay, it creates kind of a liquefaction around the pile, and the pile drops into place, being pushed by the mass of the vibratory hammer. We would propose the vibratory means here because it's less impactful to the environment. The resource agencies use that as a form of mitigation. The sound that's traveling through the water is less for the vibratory method than the impact hammer. I'm getting away from your question.
As long as you get back to it, because I'm concerned about not the sound, but the actual physical effect it could have on those other pilings.
So we find that vibratory method is very, very local. And when I say local, I mean 10 to 15 feet around the pile that's being driven. Being 40-foot offset from here, being 50 foot from the nearest pile here, there would be no effect on this structure with the vibratory method that we'd be driving these piles with.
What about the one you're talking about by the house? You said driving one over there, right?
Right there. It's the same material. We'd remove the layer of riprap on top and drive it down into the bay mud.
Just to clarify, your question is that distance to the neighbor's piers is still outside of the realm of influence of the vibration?
Yes.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay, that's it.
Thank you, and thank you for responding to our questions from there on site with such good information, particularly relative to sound and other issues. It's a concern of interruption and impact on the neighbors. So, as a part of the record, there is a sound chart available that Mr. Clark produced that shows the relative sound impact at 25 feet, 50 feet, and 100 feet. And I think it would fall within the permissible dB at the property line. Is that correct?
Correct. I think at 50 feet, is it somewhere around 57 dB? I can't recall.
76 at 50 feet, right.
76.
And just to clarify, when I spoke to the pile driving company, the company that makes the material, the equipment, the loudest part of the pile driving is actually the power generator that drives the system. And that's what
Noisier than the
that
vibration,
information,
right,
yeah, the
yeah.
power pack, the hydraulic power pack is what
Right.
produces that sound.
So let me ask you about other locations where you've installed the vibration method piers, so to speak. Have you had any impact on neighboring structures utilizing that method that you're aware of?
No, and I'll be frank with you, the closest area that we were driving piles with this method was on a beach, on a walkway, and it was a wooden pile directly adjacent to two homes. It was a point of egress down to a beach, and I would say that there was 15 feet to either side of the piles that we were driving. And that was in a granular, gravelly soil that I would say that would transfer energy much more readily than bay mud would.
Okay. So in the diagram you had before of the distances to the property lines, you had 66 feet to one side and 42 feet to the south there. So if it moved 5 feet, that would make it 47 and 61 roughly.
Correct.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Not a significant impact. All right. So I do want to ask you about monitoring of the work that goes on. You guys are involved with the project such as this to its completion. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So you're observing it to make sure there's compliance
exactly.
with the means and methods.
And what we would do for this particular case, as we do with all our projects, is we would take this to the building permit level, take these from the renderings and the pretty pictures to the design level and submit for a building permit, and then also work with the homeowner in securing a contractor and then observing the work with the homeowner to make sure it's built properly.
All right. With that said, if it were, such an agreement could be created, would you be amenable, if we approve this, to creating a monitoring system of the neighbors' piers themselves, establishing a grade mark on it that you could monitor on a daily basis, such that if they permitted that, so that you would be able to witness any impact that your current work would have on it.
Certainly. I think it would be very, very appropriate to do a photographic preconditioned survey of the pier next door, taking pictures of every pile from every direction. If there's any cracks, you can install a crack monitor. We want to make sure that if there is an issue, that we address it right away. I wouldn't expect there to be any, but we want to make sure we identify any potential deferred maintenance issues prior to moving into construction, so those can be highlighted versus at the end of construction, all of a sudden, there's issues that haven't been documented prior to.
And I would want that the elevation be monitored such that if any settling occurred as a result of the vibration, that was noticeable immediately. Knowing that that's easily done, would you be amenable to that?
Absolutely. I think part of the initial part of this project would be bring a surveyor on site and to lay this out properly, because we know that this is a very concerning fact for folks, to make sure that if this is what's approved, or if this is approved at this distance, we want to make sure that that's exactly the distance it's built at.
Okay. There's an awful lot of commentary from the public about impact on the environment and so forth. The mitigated deck really, I think, addresses. Is there anything that you saw in the commentary that is not addressed by the negative deck that you'd want to speak to?
No, I thought the negative deck was actually quite well done. I've seen sites that are like this, and I've seen sites that are very, very environmentally sensitive. In this area, really the buzzword that people throw around is eelgrass, and eelgrass is exactly what it is. It's an essential fish habitat. You see that acronym in a lot of the permitting documentation. Eelgrass is a permanent home for fish, crabs, you name it, it's there. This site is obviously devoid of any eelgrass, which makes it, I'm not going to say less desirable, but doesn't support the type of habitat that an eelgrass bed would support. I think the work that went to be put into the MND is properly done, and I think seeing as though, and I think it's checked with the fact that NOAA Marine Fisheries has been consulted with the Army Corps of Engineers and had no comment. And we know, and I forwarded communications from the Regional Water Quality Control Board, that they would be fine with the pier as is.
Okay, so your preliminary indications are that BCDC and any other agency would take this as it's proposed?
We know for sure Army Corps, we know for sure Regional Board would be on board. BCDC, they're still evaluating it.
Okay.
And they have brand new people, seems like every other month. So it's very much a difficult part of our job is to educate the folks at BCDC that what this is, how it's potentially affecting, and how any kind of effects are being mitigated.
All right. So, I think that's all for myself. Janie is here, is that correct? Yes. And so, do any of the commissioners have any questions for Janie as a part of the negative declaration before we go to public hearing? Seeing none, okay.
No.
All right. So with that said, I would thank you for a thorough presentation and take this to public comment.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. With that said, we will open this to public comment. I would ask, if possible, to keep the commentary to 3 minutes, and let's move this along as best we can with people lined up to progressively speak. We'll keep a timer up here. Please try to think of 3 minutes as you're speaking, and let's get underway. So, we're open for business, public comment. Please state your name and where you're from.
Patty Stolier, Casa Buena Drive. I have two quick questions. One is there a graphic that, I know view corridor is the big issue for a lot of people, that shows the existing views from the neighboring properties and a superimposed Photoshop of what it would look like with the new deck in place? And does that include the 22-foot boat that could be sitting there all the time except when it's in the water? That's it.
All right, thank you. Next, who do we have?
Carla Condon, 5132 Paradise Drive. I'm just to the west of the applicant. And I just want to interject that I hope that this isn't just a done deal. Mr. Clark made an elegant presentation. However, I did speak to my brother-in-law, and he came up with a multitude of other solutions to being able to get a dock and pier without going so far. And this is also his specialty that he's been doing for 40 years. At any rate, I was concerned, first of all, with the mitigated deck. I don't understand how staff and the consultant can present the information when they say that there is less than significant adverse impacts on scenic vistas. How can they say that? Neither staff nor the consultants nor the engineer representing Clausen came to our house to see what the impacts were, and they were truly significant. And they said it was substantially degrading the quality of the site surroundings, less than significant. I certainly don't agree at all, and I will present you with pictures because some of you weren't able to visit our house. The other thing, too, is that they say that there's no negative impact on the environment. However, the structures that are resting in the mud are indeed detrimental to the aquatic life that we have. The exposed vertical pilings that we're going to be looking at do detract from the beauty of the bay and bridge views that we have. So contrary to our general plan, the policy to maintain open space areas in natural states, making open space recreational uses secondary to protection of the resources, and that's right out of our general plan. So I certainly wouldn't want to take away the privilege of having some sort of easy access. We have easy access. We go down the rocks and get to the water that way, and I've gone swimming in the water that way. We saw Huntley up there, and he was there on a board, and so there are other ways of doing it. Also, the community design policy requires that residential, non-residential, and infrastructure design respect the natural areas and the ecosystems within Corte Madera. This proposal, as we saw it tonight, obstructs our bay views from many windows in our house and the decks. It interrupts our view of the bay and the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge. The docks and the piers are out of scale. We are not in Tiburon, we're not in Belvedere, and most of the waterfront properties, particularly the one on, West Shore, that Mr. Clark required, that's in Belvedere, where the lots are bigger. The whole setup is different than this little cove that we're located in. I would like to see a redesign that is practical for the water, that is about 4 feet high at high tide. I can walk all for probably over 100 feet, probably 200 feet, and still have my feet on the bottom of the bay floor. I'm sure that there are other solutions that Clausen and Mr. Clark can come up with. the one thing too is that occasional recreation use and overbuilding should not take precedence over the sensitive habitat and the precious views that attracted us to purchase our property more than 20 years ago. And so I do object that this is the only solution. I think that we should have more. We were never invited to hear and see what was being proposed as far as the extent of what we're seeing tonight. I didn't see it until Friday when I got it in my packet from the website. And I will say that Brooke did come over mid-July and told me about the plan for the dock. And I was supportive. I thought, oh, that's kind of cool to have one. Didn't see what was being posed until I received the first note from the town that came in the mail. And then the orange balloon things were put out in the bay. It gives no idea of the mass of the docks. You have no idea. All you see is 4 markers going out. So what I would like to show you is, first of all, how the mud flats are used as feeding spots for the wildlife. I've written on the back, but you'll see this is the view from our second bedroom. We only have 2 bedrooms because we were constrained by BCDC. And so we could only build within the footprint of the original house. You'll see the view again from our second bedroom. You'll see the markers that go way out here. This is the Sanders home, so you get a different perception of how far those markers go beyond. This is a view from our dining room, and you'll see how far the mud goes out. That the mud goes out way far beyond where the last marker is. So why just bring it in? You're going to still get mud anyway. And then also talking about views and talking about privacy. Okay, I invite all of you into my bathroom. And here is the master bathroom. And here is the tub, which looks right out onto the last 2 markers, where they're going to have this last big component. So people will be there, and am I supposed to wave to them from here? This was one thing, our whole house, we designed it for the views. The house is sited that way, and this will show you what it does. And so I would like for the Gordons to have an opportunity to have a dock, but certainly not this. This is way too much, and it impacts all the neighbors around. And I really don't think it would be fair to approve of something like that when it is so detrimental to all the surrounding neighbors. Oh, and one last thing, glare. There was a comment about glare. In the report, it says that there's going to be aluminum gangway. Now, that's not that, right? So is that the aluminum?
That's plastic there for the game.
Okay, so what about this aluminum?
We'll ask that, we'll get to that, yeah.
Okay, because that would cause serious glare from our house too.
All right,
Thank
Carla,
you.
I just have one question for you.
Yes.
So, you said that it blocks views of the Richmond Bridge. And I'm wondering if it is only, if it's within the visual footprint, so to speak, on the horizon of the neighboring house, where, in what way does that block the Richmond Bridge?
It interrupts we have a clear view of the water all the way to the bridge.
Right.
And this would end up with the pier and dock system bisecting that open span of the water. So we would have the low water, and then we would have this big span going clear across, and then just above that would be the bridge.
Okay, I think, I understand what your
Okay, I think you
perception
can,
is.
when the pictures come around, I think you can.
All right, thank
get-
you very much, Carl.
Sure, thank
Appreciate it.
you.
All right.
That goes out about twice as far as the house.
My name is Jim Simon. My wife Hildy and I have been residents for 38 years. In 1992, we finally got all the permits to put, we went through the BCDC, the Army Corps of Engineers, and the town of Corte Madera, and we had a rubber stamp of 9 other agencies that was state lands, and there was a whole bunch of things that had to be notified of this, but the primary people are the Army Corps of Engineers, BCDC, and the town of Corte Madera. And we have had the opportunity to enjoy a dock for the last 24 years. I'm in favor of Brooke and Huntley having the privilege of having access to the water to add to the use of their home. And I think there's room for compromise here. And I wanted to thank the commissioners for their time, and it gives me an idea of what public service really is, and thank you for what you're doing and your thoroughness and concern. And I'd like to thank the people at 21 Endeavor Cove who are so patient to go through this whole process of listening to our concerns before their own project is addressed. The Ependendio house, which was the house before Brooke and Huntley, I've made a joke that if I ever had enough notice for nuclear war, I would run over to the Ependendio house because it was built by Rich Concretes, Rich Ependendio, and it seemed that every concrete truck that he used on another job, he wound up using the excess concrete to build this house. And if I may get away from the speaker for a moment and raise my voice, this is a very strong structure. I want to thank Peter for his very, very thorough engineering. I've learned some things about vibratory hammers, but that riprap is not the thing between the house and the Ependendio house. The Ependendio house will be there long after anything else around here is there. There's so much concrete in there. I've walked through it while he was, because you have free access to walk along the shoreline, and it was unbelievable, the structure that's there. And so I would like to offer peace and compromise to the community to give Huntley and Brooke the opportunity to enjoy this property and not overpay for something that's over-engineered, and to have the access that we want. We live by a tide table that's a graphic tide table. And I apologize if I had realized how this conversation would have gone tonight. I would have brought along a graphic tide table. And there are only so many days in each month that we could use the dock to operate a boat. And the boat, our floating dock, we have one piling out front, and there's no movement. And then we have 2 pilings, and instead of wheels, we have a flat sliding surface that allows the tile adjustment, and the wheels broke off after a few years. The forces that are here are phenomenal. We have a little groin made out of concrete quickcrete, and there was a hole in the groin, and I put a rock in it and hammered it in, and it got blown out on one day in the tide. The forces here are unbelievable. The bird life here is fantastic. I don't think that they're building a dock is going to interfere with the wildlife here, but I think it's over-engineered, and I wanted to bring the scale of the project as unrealistic to any gain in the utility of the dock. The slope is much less than stated, and hoped for and wished for by anyone who wants to put this in. The use of the boat lift is impractical other than we use it twice a year. We have to very carefully look at the tide table for the entire year to pick when my youngest son and I can drop our boat in, and that's generally in April or May. And then you have to deal with the winds and the ferry wake, which is phenomenal, and it has taken all our eelgrass out. And the ferry wake has had more impact than anybody has ever brought up about anything here. Our dock is on mudflat twice a day, all year round, twice a day. Life is a sine wave, positive and negative, blood pressure pulse. Everything is a sine wave, and so are the tides. And I live by the tides, and we've been here for 38 years. The boat lift is used twice a year. The 15 and 16 foot seem to be unnecessary and unsightly. We have never, in 1980, we had a flood tide that reached a little seawall that was on our property that was a few inches, and I never knew why it was there. We didn't take it out, and the water finally reached that at an extreme 6.8 tide, 7-foot tide, with water overflow from heavy rains, and this was in 1980. There was flooding. 82, thank you.
Paradise Drive was closed.
And I think if the I don't have a pointer, but
I'll ask you to,
make it quick.
yes, please.
Actually, I'm learning.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
There he's got it.
if you started here and you had something, if you needed a height over there to get to here, had a little gangway down and then went out lower in the middle, I don't think you're gonna get much gain between here and there. You'll be amazed. If you take a look at where we are, we're set back much more than that. And it's not just the slope of the shoreline. We're literally set back. But I've seen people water ski there, and when they fall, they're standing like this. And this is hundreds of yards out. It's mudflat. It's tidal mudflat. That's the fun of living there. That's the joy of it. There's the bird life. We have osprey that come on our pilings. It's beautiful. And I want to make it real quick. And I thank you. I'm sorry if I went over. It appears that the engineering, I respect an engineering firm to come in there and do it. And Peter, it's just brilliant what you're talking about, but it's over-engineered and they're paying for that. And finally, as far as privacy, I leave it to the Condons and Sanders, but I think you can make people a lot happier if you just scaled it back and lowered it down. You're not going to gain any more function going out further, any more utility. And I apologize to you all if I went too long.
Thank you, Mr. Simon. All right. Who else would like to make a comment, please?
Good evening, Commissioners. Thanks for your time. It's been a nasty little homework assignment coming back from vacation here, but I also want to expand on what Carla said about the water being part of the view, and it's almost the highlight of that view. Of course, we can see a lot out there, but the reflection off the water, looking at anything is very dramatic. So,
I'm sorry. That's right, you didn't. I'm sorry. Please state your name and address.
oh, I'm sorry. I'm Alan Sandner. I'm at 5116 Paradise Drive.
Thank you.
Ahead of myself here. Anyhow, I am greatly concerned with the size, scope, impact, and location of this recreational structure. While I believe in enjoyment of property and access to the bay for my neighbors, I feel very little consideration has been given to us. We have had no input for this design and placement, and no important consideration has been made for the safety of our house and its pier construction foundation, now over 50 years old, with no knowledge of pier depth. Pile driving so close to our house with the resulting vibration would be risky at best without a thorough survey or geological report for stability issues. Having the structure located 45 feet from our house when our neighbors have a 140-foot wide lot makes no sense other than for their own convenience. Additionally, the length is approximately 45 feet past our house and has significant negative impacts on our privacy and view on two sides of our home. When observing due east from the dock, one can see into our master bedroom and bathroom at intended elevation. At the end of the dock facing southeast, one can see into our main living room and back deck. I do not understand how it can be declared that this is not a huge privacy issue and significant negative impact on our view. I was only presented with these plans in mid-July for the first time. I have never seen any previous plans and have only had a brief conversation about a dock prior to this current application. To call this a revised or modified plan, as stated on page 4 in the staff report, sounds misleading and implies that concessions have already been made by the Gordons. I have had no input into size, location, or scope of this project or any previous dock proposals. I have only said that I don't want a dock this close to my house some time ago. Finding number 3 in Resolution 16-025 is not justified, as we did not suggest a revised 20-foot move. We feel the information put forth by Clausen Engineering is tailored to their motivations and disregards important factors. The justification of the length of the dock related to the quote on page 4 of the staff report, quote, as proposed, the dock will sit on the bay mud 3 times during low tides in the month of August. As an example, if the dock is located 40 feet closer to shore, then it would rest on the bay mud approximately 20 times within the month of August, unquote. This is not accurate to this area. In my experience, the suggested portion of the floating dock will experience the same amount of mud almost every day and many times twice a day in a 24-hour period based on the changing tide in either position. In conclusion, this is a huge imposition on our property and our way of life. They're not just building a dock, they're building a dock next to a home. We appreciate your time and consideration in this matter and that this application is denied as presently planned. However, I don't want to deny them access to the water. I do believe they should have something. I just think scaling it back and, more importantly, shortening it. And I'm very concerned about when we have a fetch coming from the northwest that the resulting spray will definitely affect my house at this current position. I've seen the other docks in the neighborhood, and you can't believe the things we've seen. You know, I think this dock is well constructed. I like that. I like that it's secure. That does make me feel better. Some of the comments from the engineer do make me feel better about driving piles, but it is a lot of liquefaction going on out there, very soupy, very deep, unknown depths, who knows? But I haven't been approached about exactly how it was going to be done. So I was in the dark, but we get big weather and, it could easily spray my house, and that would be a major detriment to our whole side of the house there, because that is the predominant fetch. Thank you.
All right, just a moment before you leave, I want to ask you a question.
Yep.
Should we find our way to some sort of project approval, whatever that is, would you be willing to enter into agreement to allow the surveys to take place of your peers before the project commences?
I would,
All right, and during the construction?
yes.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Hello, my name's Alyssa Sandner, and I live at 5116 Paradise Drive, and I'm a lifelong resident of Corte Madera. I speak as a person who has grown up on the shoreline in this unique cove of Paradise Drive. I could attest to the ability to access the water for recreation without a dock. Firstly, I want to highlight the fact that the mitigated negative declaration acknowledges the risk to our delicate home, but offers no specific solutions. The initial assessment in Section 6 and the, quote, geology and soils, quote, section uses no scientific proof or survey for the basis of their decision, except that the area is, quote, assumed to have geotechnical and soil characteristics similar to above water portions of the parcel, end quote. But it is acknowledged that this is an area of, quote, very high potential for liquefaction, end quote. The only proposed justification by the declaration is that, quote, the project has been designed by a professional engineer following current engineering practices, end quote. Considering the inconsistencies in Clausen's report, I have little faith that they will follow through with this very vague description of mitigating the high liquefaction in the area which could destroy the foundation of our home during pile driving. The closeness and length of this also creates major issues with salt spray and noise, as this is an open water location with dynamic weather, especially during storm conditions. This condition can involve 40 to 50 mile per hour winds and 10-foot swells. Ferry waves are also a constant issue every 30 minutes. Docks always make noise in all conditions, and the prevailing northwest winds puts us directly in the spray pattern. The noisy end of the proposed dock is extremely close to the master bedroom and will create constant creaking and banging with regular ferry waves. Finally, I'd like to highlight the pictures included in Appendix B, Attachment 4 of the Clausen's report. The figures themselves are only labeled with projected water depths with drawn dotted lines of differing colors. The label says that the image represents the mean tide, but the low tide still occurs twice per day. As it appears in the drawing, the space for the dock is all a part of a large shallow flat, and if the dock is 40 feet closer or further, it will still sit on the mud when the tide is low. With the inaccurate depiction of the slope of the shore and the structural designs, I feel this image doesn't have quite the basis as a reference for this area as the engineers created it. I would like an accurate and official tide charting image created by an authority that is not labeled to benefit the Page Engineering Company. With all these inconsistencies and vague statements in their defense, I'm not so sure that it justifies the safety of our home for this purely recreational project. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Eliza. Who else would like to stand up and speak?
Hi, I'm Sue Duree, and I live at 5094 Paradise Drive. You received my late email this afternoon that was in the back. I just had a few things that I heard today that I wanted to address, and I'm kind of going to run with what Jim Simon said about they're not going to get any more advantage being so far out. Living on the water for 33 years, I'm going to attest to that. My neighbor is the one with the very long dock right at the point that sits out the farthest. I personally don't have a dock. And her floating dock is in the mud twice a day. So the nonsense that we've seen about it being in twice a month out here, I guarantee you it's not like that. What I wanted to say is it's my understanding that the floating pier takes 4 pilings, and we're short on pilings if we move this over. So since nobody except the Gordons would like to see it out this far, you take those 4 pilings and put them up against the house to create a 90-degree angle so you can walk along the house and have a straight walk out on your pier. So it's a good compromise that eliminates the length. It moves it away from the Sanders house. It puts it in the middle. So those are my 2 cents.
Thank you very much. Who else do we have here that would like to make a comment? So we're going to close the public comment section unless somebody else steps up to the microphone. So that's it. We're going to close the public comment section of this. We're going to bring it back up here to the commission. So all of you have heard and taken notes on everything that's been commented on tonight, most of which is in some form in the email or record that we've got that's come in to us. Do any of you have any further questions for staff at this point before we start discussing it? Has anything come up as a result of the commentary or that has occurred to you since we first heard from them? Yes, yeah.
That's staff, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I had a question for Jamie. There's been a number of references to some of the environmental impact, and I read through this, and it appeared that because this is mud flat, that the impact would be pretty minimal. I also wanted you to address that a little bit, but also what is the effect of a dock going in any place with these materials as proposed as far as impacting the environment? Is anything in the, plastic sleeve or the plastic encasement for the floats that is a problem or, toxic to the environment? How is the environment impacted when a project like this goes forward?
Thank you for the comment. My name is Janie Alsep. I'm a planning and environmental consultant retained by the town of Corte Madera, as explained previously. With regard to the effects on mudflats, so just to be clear, the only portion of what's being proposed that would sit on the mudflat is the floating dock. It would rise and fall with the tide. It would be 240 square feet total, which is considered a fairly minor amount that would be sitting on the mudflats during the period of time of low tides, and it's not considered to have a significant effect given the size and scale of what would be sitting on the dock. The other point related to the mudflats is that, as many of you know, and as well documented in your own general plan, tidal flats or mudflats are very important ecosystems, typically because they provide a transition in areas where there is upland areas that are open to open space areas, and it can serve as a very important area for sea life and shorebirds and all of that. But it's primarily in sensitive areas where there is a wetland or an upland habitat that is also available for terrestrial and aquatic species. That's where the value really is in terms of the tidal flats. Here in this case, the upland area is a developed home that doesn't really afford refuge space or doesn't have a high biological value in this particular location. If you move down to the west near Triangle Marsh or in the in the larger wetlands that are conserved in areas, those areas have much higher value just because they are connected to the upland and wetland areas. So that's related to the tidal flats. You mentioned, in general, the effects or the effects of the environment on the materials and the type of structures that are proposed. As has been indicated by both the applicant and in the staff report, anything that goes in the water, they are highly regulated in terms of what can go in, what's allowed, because protection of the marine environment is really at the core of a lot of what the permitting processes are. The type of materials that are proposed, including the composite that has the ability to have light shine through, is what is preferred by these other agencies, including Fish and Wildlife and BCDC, NOAA, and National Marine Fisheries, which is part of NOAA. So all of the materials are consistent with what these regulatory agencies will typically require, and there's nothing that's being proposed that I can see that would have any effect on the environment in terms of the materials that are proposed. They seem to be appropriate for the type of facility that is being proposed.
Okay, Ms. Condon has shown a lot of pictures of the birds that are out there on that at low tide. Does the structure in any way, impede them? Do they stay away from that and just go far away from it? Does the dock sitting in the mud, have any adverse effect on their ability to feed on the mud flats?
Well, they won't be able to feed within the 240 square feet that is covered, but there are other areas obviously available for the wildlife to go and to forage and feed. So given the relatively small size of what would be sitting on the mud flats, it would not be considered something that would rise to the level of significant effect. If that were the case, then they wouldn't have gotten an IMPS approval, because those are the types of things that they look for, but clearly that was part of the environmental review as well.
Thank you.
All right. Anybody else have any questions for Stan? No. All right. Thank you very much. Anyone for Phil? Any questions for Phil or anyone else on staff? No. Okay. So that said, We have the application as it's proposed. We've heard a lot of commentary about altering it or modifying it. We've heard about the suitability of the project as a whole. So there's that issue, there's modifying it, there's moving it, and there is denying it. So we have, in essence, those options before us, or continuing it if we are unable to arrive at a conclusion with the information that we have. We could do any of those actions. So, again, I'm going to say we can accept it, we can move it and ask for a movement of it, a redesign of it, continue it, modify it, shorten it. We can deny it as well. So, with that said, I'm going to start with you, Phyllis, and ask you for your thoughts about the application and whether any of those elements should be considered or put forth.
Okay. One of the things that became apparent tonight, and it's interesting that it's happening with the pier just as we've seen it with homes and buildings, when the neighbors aren't contacted and sit down and have a discussion and understand the project as it goes along and as it's designed, this is the reaction you get, with people upset, and it really, I think it hurts applicants. And as I say, this is the first pier we've had in the 6 years or so I've been on the commission, but we see this all the time with residences, and it creates the type of problem we have tonight, which I'm sorry we have, for everybody concerned. Looking at your 5 choices. Let's look at the 3 in the middle: move it, modify it, shorten it. We have tried doing that in the commission hearings before, and we get more and more confused and involved in becoming, in this case, the engineer or the architect, even though 2 of us have studied architecture. I can't accept it as it is. To deny the project of having the dock, I cannot do that either. I would like a way to send it back and ask the applicant, the engineer, and the neighbors to sit down and have some communication, have our staff involved if that's appropriate, to find something that everybody can live with. Nobody's going to be completely happy, we know that. But at least the input of the neighbors will ease the fact that change is being made after 20 years, 38 years, and whatever the other 40 years. I think I got the 3 people who spoke giving their times. So that's what I would say at this point. Yes, I have ideas about what should be done, but I just don't think it's appropriate at this point to say them.
All right, well, I'm going to come back to you with a little clarification, despite your wish not to be on that.
I knew you
We'll get to that later. So, Dr. Bundy, the impacts that we've talked about here and those options, what would be your statement about this application?
Well, these are tough problems because there hasn't been a dock there ever, and now there's a dock that's being proposed, and it's impacting people. I do think, as has been stated by even those in opposition to it, that if you have waterfront property, you're buying it for a particular reason, and oftentimes that means you want to use the water and you want to be able to use the water, as conveniently and safely as possible. And so I feel that even homes that don't have docks, probably at some point, unless they're significant environmental impacts, will end up with docks in the future, just as there's limited amount of waterfront property and people are going to want that. I am very concerned about the impact of privacy on the Sanders, and that, because they have their living quarters out over the water, this is going to impact that. I appreciate that Peter has redirected this and moved it over. I would like to see it, it moved over a little further, either that 2-degree angle or moving the start of the walkway itself a little to the east, closer to the deck that is next to it. And so I would approve it with modifications to that effect to try to create a little more privacy for the Sanders, and also to have the stipulation that there isn't going to be permanent dock furniture, lawn furniture, tiki bar, anything like that out there.
All right, thank you. Nicolo, I'm going to go down to you and ask you for your feedback on this.
Sure. Overall, I would like to second what Dr. Bundy said, but however, I would have to agree that from a design review point of view, which is what we're doing, the temporary mooring bolts do not provide the realistic condition of the proposed structure. So you don't see the heights, you don't see much, you just see bolts. So that's kind of difficult for everyone, I think, to, unless you've got really through it with your imagination, to really see the entire thing. At least I do. Then secondly, I think it's really difficult to make a decision on length, which would impact the usability of the system to its full capacity. I would like, if possible, to see again, in another time, in a very simplistic form, the tide levels. What would happen at 80 feet? How many days of a year you have water at 100 feet? So people that are not like expert can really understand the impact of shortening the length 20 feet, 30 feet, which maybe that would be, seems to be one of the mitigations that could be possibly be accepted. So that's my position on this point. I like to see it coming back.
All right. Thank you, Nicolo. Jennifer, your thoughts, please.
Okay. Well, I appreciate everyone's comments tonight, and obviously, as everyone up here has mentioned, these are the most difficult issues that we weigh in on. I do think that the applicant has a right, and it seems like most of the neighbors agree, should have a right to access their water, which is why they bought this project. And I do think this project is fairly consistent with the other docks, maybe not necessarily right in Corte Madera, but when we looked at, I think there's, 12 other docks that have been given as examples as being consistent with what has been built near here, and that this dock has been stated as being consistent with what has been allowed in Belvedere, which again, I understand is not our jurisdiction. I think it's possible that perhaps the applicant, as everyone has said up here, could consider maybe the floating dock and the gangway, become part of the pier head off to the side. I'm not an architect, but I would be supportive of the project as it is, but I know that I'm in the minority up here. So, and I understand it's a change from everyone's views, but the other thing I would just mention is the two neighbors, I don't believe that the view of the water itself is a primary view, and we often get into primary versus secondary views. So I think with the condition that the applicant would monitor the pier integrity of the Sanders property next door, and perhaps also that one other issue is the reflectivity, I think, that came up on the aluminum components. Maybe that's something to consider, but I would be supportive of the project as it is.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Conditions.
For my own part here, I feel like the project in itself is also inoffensive as it's designed, but I also understand how it does impact the neighbors to a large extent. There's a couple of issues that we just talked about, moving the dock over, shortening the dock, or changing the mooring point. all of which mean really a redesign and plan, and it would have to be resubmitted before us. We can't, I don't think we could condition it directly in such a manner. So it would need to be redrafted and brought before us if we were to do that. The next thing that I would like to hear the commissioners opine upon is sort of the view impact. So we've talked about the plan of this thing, and I think that the view impact that we've heard so much about is something important to be clear about what we see and are aware of as a view impact, because there's so much mention of it in all of the commentary. As Jennifer just said, you know, it's not a primary view. I don't see where any part of this arises to the level of the horizon from any property there, and does not block the horizon view. And from the properties to the west, the structure actually almost entirely falls within the visual footprint of the Sanders property. It certainly doesn't extend above it. You'd have to be below the floor level of any of those homes to look up and see it stick up in the air. Granted, the piers would stick up in the air at the end of the dock, but there's something that would be there where nothing exists now, and that certainly is an impact. Is it a significant impact? I don't believe so. And there's no primary view that is blocked. But this would fall into the category of if something is built where nothing existed, there's an impact. And we face that all the time. So everything changes, stuff gets built in the town, homes are built, they have an impact. There is something built where there was nothing before. And as we typically witness, then there is upset from that. And I understand that. I have the same problem. And yet, you know, everybody has a right to develop their property. But I really would like to hear each of you speak to that a little bit. So, Phyllis, your thoughts about the view impact of this structure, and whether you think that it requires further mitigation or it's acceptable as it is in that area.
Okay. All right. It is my understanding that the height of it, at its highest, coincides with the deck along the Sanders house. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. Yeah. I'm sure we're not asking the audience, we're not asking anybody questions here, so let's
I'm
talk.
just,
Yeah.
I think, as far as the view goes, that it is too long. It goes out too far. If it was modified to a shorter length, if the gangway, I think that's what comes of that, was shortened somewhat, if the floating dock was turned horizontal instead of vertical, would cut it back. Now, how that affects the tides, I don't know. That's why I say I'm not extremely knowledgeable about water and tides, and I'm not going to pretend I am. But I think the length could be cut back. After listening to different people speak, it seems that the difference from the first horizontal line, looking up there,
Right.
where the lift is, and the second one, which coincides with the end of the floating dock, that the water's not that much deeper. So it really isn't necessary to have that length.
Okay. All right, and that's what you're referring to as sort of a view impact, that it sticks out so
Yes,
far?
that
Okay.
it sticks
Right.
out. If it was closer to how far as the Sanders house sticks out, I think it would be more acceptable. I mean, I would move it over some, I would make it lower, I would shorten it. There are a lot of things I would do, but it has to be a workable dock. And I'm not going to claim that I have all of the knowledge needed to make it work in a different way.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Bundy?
Yeah, I think the views from the Sanders house are going to be impacted by this, and that's the reason that I felt that more it could be moved away from that, the impact would be somewhat diminished, although it's still there. So it's unfortunate that this is 2016 and not 1992 when Dr. Simon built his dock. It probably would have been lower and would have had a little less impact, but the BCDC, the Corps of Engineers, the concern about sea level rise are all impacting what's required, as well as building a dock that will withstand the elements that we've heard about out there. And it seems like this is a well-engineered dock from that standpoint. And if you are going to try to utilize a dock that has a boat that you want to get out of the water, which most people would want to do, most people would try to get it out of the water if they can, and only use it when they've got a high tide and they're going to be in the water. If you have that aspect of it, and then the floating dock is pretty standard from the standpoint of docks and being able to enter the water safely and easily, or get into a boat safely and easily. So I think some of it is the regulations, some of it is just the engineering standards that are there, and I think that it is not as impactful as some of the older docks that with the wider walkways and more opaque railings and such. So I think they've done a good job of trying to reduce that. My condition would be to ask for it to be shifted a little to the east and possibly that angle redone to move it potentially another 8-10 feet away from the Sanders property.
All right, thank you, Bob. Nicola, about the viewplane, and how you would address those issues specifically. What do you see as an issue or not?
It'll be simple. 5116, I think, yes, it does impact the primary views. At 5132, I think it impacts the secondary views, so it wouldn't be as critical. But overall, I think what Dr. Bundy said, I agree 100%. I mean, you summarized it really well, and I concur with what he said.
All right.
As well.
Thank you. Jennifer, what would you contribute to what you've already said about view, if
Right.
anything? And I'm asking that as to, whether it is an impact or not, and how you view that.
Well, I think obviously it is an impact, or else there wouldn't be so many people here talking about the impact. Again, I would say, I think for both of the neighbors, that those views will not be obstructed in any way by, from what I could tell, the height of the top of the piers would not be obstructing primary views. Views to the north of Mount Tam, is it to the north? No.
That's to the west.
West, excuse me, to the west of Mount Tam, from 5116. Again, I think obviously that's unobstructed water view of the water at this point, and that would change, but I don't think that they are primary views for either neighbor.
All right, thank you. And I'll just say it again, that given the elevation of the deck and the railings, it is not rising above a level that I think is impactful. However, I think that I would ask for one of two motions from the other commissioners here to either say that we approve it as is, or secondly, we ask them to resubmit with moving the dock over a minimum of 5 feet and find a way to shorten the dock by an agreeable amount, and possibly try to change the mooring point. I don't think that's really a good idea, but I've heard it mentioned, but it would impinge the use of the dock for what it is. We've agreed that it would be conditioned to include no other materials left on the dock, and I would also include that any surfboards or windsurfing boards or sailboards or paddle boards not be left on the dock as a part of it on a daily basis. So I think we have that before us. Who would propose a motion, please, to send this back for redesign in such that manner, or approve it.
I will make a motion to send it back with the points you made, if you'll repeat them, since. you
Sure,
haven't-
we
yeah.
move it over a minimum of 5 feet, shorten it by up to 20 feet between where it is now, and examine change in the mooring point, which I don't think is good. I would not include that. But then I would also condition it for the material, that it remains daily as it is, blank, empty, every day. It has no materials
Yes,
left on
okay.
it, and that we would ask that in their resubmittal, they include a monitoring proposal.
A monitoring proposal
For
for
the-
the construction.
Correct.
The pilings, and I guess we can't force it, but certainly encourage them to work with the adjacent neighbors.
That's right.
That,
We can ask that staff reach out and try to schedule a meeting if anybody wants to attend such
Yeah.
a meeting, and put it before them.
I think,
and then-
and the differences could be worked out before it comes to the commission, and, or a majority of the differences, I think, would be helpful for all the people concerned. They're all going to have to live near each other in the future.
So to summarize,
Yes.
the motion would be to resubmit with the movement of the dock over and the shortening of the dock and the other specific conditions.
I think Bob was the one who talked about doing something, having some deck along the house so they could enter at the ends. I thought somebody said it.
Yeah, that's a very difficult.
Oh,
option.
okay, all right.
I would not
All right.
recommend that.
So shortening it, moving it over, not having any materials left on it, and monitoring the pilings of the Sender home during the construction.
Okay,
And this, just to clarify, this is a motion for continuation
correct.
Yes, we continue it with these instructions,
with direction.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
these directions.
Right. Do we hear a second on that specific motion?
Can I ask a question?
Yes, you may.
Within these changes, can we ask to see what are the impacts of reducing 20 feet of length within, as far as floating and the usability of the system?
That
Would it
makes
be
sense.
appropriate in
Yes.
simple
I would
form?
accept that as the maker of the motion, if you want to second it, adding that.
Just for
Okay.
clarification, because we want to determine if the initial study needs to be modified at all. When you say how a reduction of the dock will change impacts, are you
Okay, let's be
speaking
clear about that. To your point,
biological,
is not-
view,
You're asking
noise?
for-
No, specifically the usability of the docks from a boat
Usability.
standpoint.
Okay, so, it seems like,
Yeah,
it seems like
say
a
20
lot of
feet, then
questions.
only 3 months of the year I can use the boat, otherwise it's always in. Or-
The access to the use of the boats.
But I don't know how they can provide the study and then at the same time make the design. So maybe, they make the design, they shorten, and then they show that doesn't work, so maybe it doesn't make any sense.
I think that we would have that information of a reduced usage before us, and we would literally be having two designs essentially before us. We would have this design and a new design before us. So with those impacts of that. Yes, Bob?
In relationship to shortening of the entire length, my understanding from reading the document was that BCDC was really encouraging floating docks to be out at a certain distance. And so that can be brought back with this study.
Yes.
Yes, that's my understanding as well. And certainly Ms. Alsep could speak to it in more detail, but it is, yeah, I agree.
All right, so it's a continued application with options.
Did Niccolo second it?
Second.
Okay, yeah.
All right, so be
Okay,
it.
we'll take that. Commissioner Metcalf?
Aye.
Commissioner Bundy?
Aye.
Commissioner Chase?
Aye.
Commissioner Friedman?
Aye.
Commissioner Caldera?
Aye.
Thank you. So as a continued hearing, we're going to a date uncertain at this point.
That's right.
Yes. So thank you very much. We're going to take a 10-minute break and then,
Decide whether we wish.
yeah. So we're back on here at 10 o'clock. We have the opportunity to discuss whether, how late we're going to go here.
Okay.
We have this one item before us, the 21 Endeavor Cove project, as well as routine and other matters before us. So
Okay.
shall we,
Reading, you want to read what it says?
that we will adjourn by 11 unless the commission votes to extend the meeting. No new item would be commenced after 10 p.m. unless otherwise decided by a vote of the commission. So do we have a vote of the commission to continue?
Move to continue.
Move to continue. All right.
I'll second that.
Thank you.
Aye.
Aye. I mean, they've waited all night.
All right. So the next item before us is the 21 Endeavor Cove, a major design review, number PL 2016-0013, and a major variance PL 2016-0015 for a major interior and exterior remodel, including a 550 square foot addition to the second story and a 130 square foot addition to the entryway of the lower level of an existing single-family home with a request for a 9-foot encroachment into the required 20-foot setback. So, Mr. Bush has this on his calendar for presentation.
All right, from the bay to the hills. So here is a vicinity map giving a better idea of the general area that we're looking at here. 21 Endeavor Cove is up on the hill above the bay where we just were. Here we're looking at kind of a general vicinity map showing Endeavor Cove, showing the location of the homes along this street, the general characteristics of the lot being heavily sloped with a level graded building area. You can also see here, though not with great detail, but the location of many of the homes along the street are pushed into the front setback. Also, you can see that the neighboring properties to the east, which are zoned public open space, are not they're not developed and presumably would not be developed in the future. So there are no neighbors to the east here. The neighbors were contacted by the applicant. Staff's understanding that the applicant did reach out to neighbors before public notice was sent by the town, and 3 letters of support were provided in the staff report. Staff sent public notice out to all residents within 300 feet of the property and did not receive any feedback from those recipients. Here is another look at the existing home on the lot, which is a 2-story home, again with a sloped yard, which partly explains why a significant portion, as you see, has not been developed. There's a narrow portion along the rear for the flat yard in the back, as well as an existing patio with an overhanging trellis. Here's the existing street elevation, looking west-northwest. Here again, looking at the elevation facing the western neighbor. As you'll see, there's few windows facing this neighbor and no windows facing the neighbor on the other side, which is 25 Endeavor Cove. Here's the site viewed from Granada Drive. Again, this is a lot that's a double frontage lot going from Granada Drive down below up to Endeavor Cove, where the home is located. Here's just another view. This was taken a few months back, so don't mind the story poles here. They have since changed, but this is just showing the general proximity of the neighboring, of the neighbors to the subject property. And of course, a great view of Mount Tam. Here is the site plan showing, it's a little difficult to see here, but the green outline, which comes around here, is the existing footprint of the house. And superimposed here with blue are the areas of new additions. As you can see, there is an existing, some existing encroachment into the front setback. I believe the resulting setback is 18.5 feet, where it's required to be 20. It's believed that many of these homes were built as part of the original subdivision with some encroachment into the front setback because of the difficult topography and the decisions made at that time. This was built in the 60s, as well as were the neighboring structures. One of the first things within the proposal that we're looking at here in the site plan is an area of a new parking space. There's an existing two-car garage. One of the spaces has been converted, I believe, in the distant past without permits, and so there is existing one parking space that's covered. So as part of the proposal, there's a new parking space in the side yard which conforms to the requirements in this lot in the R1 district, zoning district. Again, here is an existing elevation showing the house as you just saw, and the proposed elevation here. So I'd like to point out first the largest addition here is to the left of the house as viewed from the street. There's a 550 square foot addition which creates space for a master bedroom and an office. There's also roughly 125 square foot front entryway shown here, and we'll show you in the site plan in just a moment. Here is another perspective on the proposed elevations. You see that generally the house is undergoing a major remodel here. There's very few elements from the original home that are being carried forward. There's a vertical board and batten siding and horizontal lap siding along the lower level. The proposed materials, which are shown here,
Thank you. As much as I do.
there's a fiber cement siding, hardy plank siding that are proposed, generally using a color palette of white and gray. A standing seam metal roof, which is also gray color. There's a color chip, actual sample on the color and materials board. Also, just to note, more articulation in this proposed design, architectural articulation than the existing home, adding more visual interest, one might say. Here is the existing lower floor plan and the proposed lower floor plan, showing that the changes extend to the interior to a significant degree as well. Here on the lower is the proposed and the upper is the existing, again the lower. A more open floor plan connecting the dining room and kitchen. And as shown, the portion of the garage that was converted is shown here, which was originally a parking space, and that's being changed here to bring it into compliance with current building code. Also, there's a non-conforming stairway from the original construction that's being updated here. As part of the change to the stairway, the applicant has proposed an extension of the front entryway. This is in part to allow the reconfiguration of the stairs and to also provide a functional entryway and clear flow through the home in this portion of the house. Also shown here is another element which is being added here, which is a covered front entry porch that extends off the entryway. Also, a trellis is proposed here. Here is the upper level of the proposed and the existing. Again, the existing is at top, proposed is at bottom, showing that currently Half the house is covered with the upper level here, where there will be a master bedroom and office with the addition. Again, no windows are proposed facing 25 Endeavor. On the other side of the house, where there is an existing single window, there is also carried forward in this design another window. However, it's a clear story window and is not anticipated to have any adverse impacts on neighbors' privacy. Here is a photo of clearly of the story poles as they stand today. The height of the residence would increase from just under 22 feet to just over 26 feet, as shown here. In addition, the applicant has proposed a landscape plan for a portion of the house most significantly affected by the proposed additions. Generally using drought-tolerant plantings, a combination, as shown on your plans, not shown on this slide. There's a key showing the various plantings, including a magnolia, which is a large tree here, maple tree, as well as a number of boxwoods. Moving on to the second part of this application, which is the requested variance. As mentioned previously, the house is existing non-conforming in terms of the front setback, where 20 feet is required. I apologize, in the staff report it says 15 feet is required. 20 feet is required. The setback existing is 18.5 feet. I've highlighted here the portions of the addition which encroach into the front setback and require a variance approval to move forward. As discussed before, showing the site plan, in order to reconfigure the stairway and also provide a functional entryway, the applicant has proposed this extension of the interior space. Staff believes findings can be made for the variance based on the hardship of the existing stairway and the need for some additional space to reorient that and create a more functional layout. And given the fact that the house is already encroaching and any addition would expand that encroachment. Some other features, however, staff questions whether findings can be made for the wood arbor, the roofed entry porch, as well as the bay window, which extends into the setback. While some elements can extend into the front setback, these, as highlighted, do require a variance. There has not been established a clear relationship between the hardship of the stairway and the need to reorient that to bring it up to code, and these elements, the wood arbor, namely, and the roofed entry porch. Moving forward, just to give a little bit more context here, here's a photo taken this afternoon showing the proposed setback and the relation to the sidewalk. Again, here's some of the numbers to summarize here. The front setback would be going from 18.5 feet to 11 feet. The rear setback would not change, nor would the side setbacks. However, lot coverage would increase, floor area would increase, both well within the standard, given the large size of the lot. The height would increase as well. Staff does not expect any significant shading impacts on privacy or views of the adjacent neighbors due to the relationship between this house and the adjacent neighbors and the angle of basically the sun's path of travel in relation to the neighboring residences. While currently there is a single covered parking space, as you know, they're required to provide one covered parking space and an additional parking space, which they have shown on the site plan in the side yard. I've included the list of required variance findings. I've provided those on the dais because they were not provided in the staff report. And these are the findings that have to be made to approve each of those elements that I've highlighted that are within the front setback. All of these findings have to be made, and that is one of the questions here today, is whether the planning commission can make these findings. As I said before, and as it's been clarified in the staff report, there is some question about whether these findings can be made for all aspects of the project. I've also taken photographs of other properties on the street to give some comparisons to other similar homes, and those are available to view if you would like. And also, I believe.
Yeah, I'll bring that up.
Okay,
Yeah, so.
I have that as well.
Oh, you do? Okay, so, just a minute.
Can I just ask him one question?
Just a sec.
Oh.
Thank you.
So,
I asked you earlier in the week for plots along the street and the setbacks of the current structures. There's records of only so many. I went to the street and took laser measurements from the curb, not necessarily from the sidewalk, from the curb to the structures. So I did that and sent you guys a document that just recorded those dimensions. And for the record,
I've
You
included
got
that
it
in a
up there?
separate
Okay.
PDF that I can show.
Great,
in a
okay.
moment.
That's fine. Great. So then,
And in conclusion, today staff is looking for direction from the planning commission on, clearly a resolution has not been prepared due to some of the questions about the findings for the variance. However, staff does believe that for the majority of the project, including the extension of the front entryway, that all the design review findings can be met, and the variance findings can be met for those aspects of the project as well. But staff's looking for a direction and can prepare a resolution for a presentation and a continued hearing.
all right.
And just to clarify, it doesn't, depending on your direction, it wouldn't necessarily have to be at a continued hearing. So we could follow up with a resolution for your review, but as I understand it, it wouldn't necessarily have to be at a full public hearing again,
Right.
depending on your direction.
Direction, okay. Thank you very much. Phyllis, you have a
Yeah,
question?
well, it had to do with the setback sheet, I'll call it,
Right.
that you put together.
He's got it.
And the one, to have the two of them coincide, I am assuming we have to subtract 4 feet, the sidewalk width,
That's correct.
from each one of these.
Right. More or less, right. So.
See, Peter took it from the curb.
Right, I just took it from the curb.
To the front.
And so, laser reporting to the story pole at the applicant's house said it was 1510
So
to
it'd
the story pole. If you took away the 4-foot sidewalk, that would be 11 foot 10.
Yeah.
But it's shown as 11 foot on the plan.
Well, also on the plan, going through all the pages of this and the initial one, we don't see what the depth is of the entryway, the portico.
So we'll get to.
The figure isn't given.
We'll get to that in a second, so, I just want to state here what that's represented, and then we'll move on. So, the house at 9, Endeavor Cove, less the sidewalk would be 12 foot 10 to the house if we take the 4 foot off the sidewalk. And that would be, and number 5 would be 14 foot 6, according to this, roughly. Very rough numbers. So, it was two-sided.
Yeah, I think there's another
So,
page on that.
right,
if-
Okay. So that said, I will ask if any of the commissioners have questions for Doug or staff based on what he's presented so far.
I'd like to know if, when you were out there, Doug, did you by some chance measure the depth of the portico?
Well, he shows that it's, yeah, you've got it there, but it's 11 foot to 15 foot 6, so it's a 4 foot 6 setback from the front of the porch.
Well, and also just to note that measurement of 11 feet is actually to the The posts
to the posts.
and not
posts.
the eaves over the posts.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm talking about the little red box in the
Yep.
front of your town. So you're saying it's 4.5 feet?
No, here's 11, here's 15.
No, I'm talking about behind,
To this right here?
no, over left, down, where it
Yes.
says entry
Yes.
porch.
Peter, so I
There,
think,
where the lines are, that's right.
Yes.
That's what I'm talking about. That is the part
yes,
that the poles show, coming forward, this
Yes.
very attractive
yes,
portico.
yes.
And it's 4.6.
Well, it's a little bit more when you count the eaves. I'm sorry, Doug.
Okay. 5.
Could ask the applicant.
Yeah, we can
Yeah,
ask that.
because
when-
we
when-
could ask later. Yeah, it seems huge. Okay.
All right,
Looking at all the plans, the other changes, where it comes forward to correct the problem with the stairs, et cetera, everything else
you have a
I
question?
can approve. Oh,
No, that's what I'm asking, yeah, if you have any questions for staff.
no, my only question was what the depth was
Okay.
of the entry porch.
All right, thank you. Dr. Bundy?
No questions.
All right. Nicolo, do you have any questions for
No,
staff at this point?
Just to clarify, on the report, on the summary, page 2, it lists the existing two-car garage. Is that tandem, or it's just it's just a one-car garage?
The existing is
Existing two-car garage.
it's not operable as a two-car garage because one space has been converted. So really, the existing condition is a single covered parking
Got it.
space.
That's, okay, thank you.
All right, Jennifer, any questions for
I
staff?
don't have any questions.
All right. Thank you. All right, so, Mr. Harlock or the applicant, who would like to come up and make us? Okay, please, say your name and your address, please.
Nick Lockwood, 21 Endeavor Cove. As you can see, fairly simple, normal-looking house. We're not trying to do a monstrosity. It's 2,500 square feet with 4 people in our family. We think that's enough for us. It's not a radical design. It's not anything modern. And as this all has been stated, and Michael talked about before, it's 15 feet to the house, and the point of contention, I guess, is the entry porch, which there's other houses on the street that are very close, closer than our house will be. The setback you were talking about was to the house. Most of the houses on the street don't have a proper entryway. And so I don't think that the staff is concerned about how we reconfigure the stairway to make it in the code and give a proper entryway, but you kind of need a formal entryway. And I guess you could redesign the house and not have that porch, but I don't think it would be as pleasing on the eye. And, we obviously have room in the back of the house, but there's a very limited part of flat land back there. And when you're talking about hardship, we would have to take the house up and move it backwards to meet the setback requirements. So we feel like Michael presented, a month ago, we looked through this for several months. We took the entry porch, pushed it back, took the width down, took the depth down, and made it shorter. And the wood arbor is actually only 4 feet from the house, so I don't believe that Michael can get into that, but I don't think that matters as much. But we did get away from the front porch to kind of lessen the impact from the street. So I feel like we've taken direction from the commission and tried to make it a little more compliant. We realize we still need a variance, but I guess the hardship is you need to have a front porch. You don't have to, but the hardship is it won't look as nice when it's finished. So,
Okay, he didn't pick any of that up very well, I guess. So, the microphone's still working, we trust, but it didn't
Maybe
get picked up.
No, it was turned on, sorry.
It's me. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
We'll
Do I
turn
have to
it
say
off.
it again?
Joanne,
Just the highlights.
how did you get that? Did you get that,
Ooh.
Joanne? Okay, so you got it. All right, thank you, even though you're not here, as I understand that. So, all right, Mr. Harlock,
Sorry.
would you please step up?
Michael Harlock. I'm the designer architect, 533 Redwood Avenue. I'll try and just limit this to what I think are the remaining points. of issue. This is, as Doug pointed out, the staff report is very complete. The only thing I question is the diagram that shows this now cantilevered arbor. The drawing to the right is what the current proposal is. The rendering and the drawing to the left is what we showed you last time, okay? Now, last time we had a post-supported arbor to the left, sort of yellowish, and that did require a variance. Now it's just a cantilevered arbor that comes out 3 feet. And I thought I understood from Doug that any projection like that that was less than 6 feet would not require a variance. This would be only 4.5, as it's been redesigned, only 4.5 feet. Also, the bay over the driveway only projects out 18 inches. And I believe that we're allowed to do that. So what I'm saying is, Doug in the staff report indicated there were 3 new elements that required the variance. I think, if I'm correct, we're only talking about the center entry as encroaching into the variance. We think we've really listened from the discussion session. I know 4 of you were there. Jennifer is new. Not only did we bring it back 3 feet further from the curb, but in looking at it with the clients, they felt that it was they also agreed it was a little too imposing, looking at the upper left picture in terms of height. So we brought it back 3 feet. We lowered it 3 feet. This is the entry portico, and we narrowed it from 3 feet. Everything's 3 feet. And that's the drawing on the upper right. It's a slightly different perspective. I couldn't create exactly the same angle. And the plan below shows we're building less building area. And Phyllis, you asked the difference in the porch. The porch was 6 feet clear, width from the front door, and it has been shrunk to 4 feet from the front door to the post. So we've taken a little bit out of the building depth, and we've taken a little bit out of the porch depth. And I wouldn't want to get less than 4 feet, because this has to be sort of a passage from the garage. I wouldn't want to shrink that down anymore. Doug, and I don't want to, could you pull up the drawing of the second floor as proposed, the floor plan of the second floor? I want to address this question of hardship. It's obviously not as much hardship as not being able to build a dock onto the bay. But I don't mean to be flippant about the word hardship, is a relative term. I do think that you should note that if the stairway had to move to provide internally, the stairway is reconfigured, but it's important to note that it arrives on the second floor, both in the same spot. And that allows the 2 bedrooms and bath, essentially the children's area and laundry, to have the same, we can keep that same floor plan. If we had to change the location of the stair, we would eliminate the possibility of, and this is an important part of the budget, to save that second floor layout that exists. And I think that is a major, more than an inconvenience. It's a major financial. This is already a fairly expensive project, but they have to go in and reconfigure that. would be a major financial hardship. So I think we do qualify. And given the direction we had last time, I think we've done, we've lowered it a foot and pushed it back six inches. We've made, and I think those drawings say it pretty well on the wall, we've really listened to you. The owners have listened to you, and we think we have something that's demonstrably following the direction that we heard at our discussion session. So I'm open to your questions.
All right, thank you. Of the other commissioners, who would like to ask Mr. Harlock any questions? Nicola, would you have any questions for Mr. Harlock at this point?
Questions? No.
No.
No
Okay.
questions.
Jennifer?
So I think you answered this, but so the point of the stair that's staying the same as the landing point on the second floor, you said?
Correct.
And so it's open currently, or sorry, it will be open to the floor below in the revised plan? but
In
not
the
current
revised,
plan.
it is,
Okay.
yes. There's sort of a second-story space there.
Okay, and so the part that's requiring the additional, or the variance in front is because the lower portion of the stair is now on that side versus going.
You
the
kind of
other
have to go to the
direction?
first floor
Or-
plan.
Okay,
The way it is now, I'm going to say, you may say, well, there's a door and there's a space, but the door swings within 4 feet of the bottom of the stairs. I think by most people's understanding, this house doesn't really have practically a defined entrance.
okay.
And that's, we feel that this is not grand. Nick said, 20, we're going to a 2,500 square foot house. So this isn't a McMansion by any sense. So we're trying to do something that gives a modest sense of entry, but realizing that whatever we do requires a variance. We can't do anything without a variance, okay? Everybody clear on that? We cannot do anything with the entry. Anything we would do, and I think staff has acknowledged this, will require a setback variance.
Because you're non-conforming now, and
Yes.
essentially, so, right.
Here's the line. This is
Right.
the 20-foot line.
Right.
And this part of the existing house is already in that zone.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any other questions.
All right. Dr. Bundy?
Yeah, I tend to agree with Michael that the house really needs an entrance. It's a nicely designed addition and a nice
Do you have any,
style.
Do you have any questions for Mr. Harlock at this
The
point?
one question I had was on the arbor that you have. Is that going to be supported with a knee brace, or how is that supported?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. We can't just have a sky hook. So it'll most likely, what we've looked at is not finely detailed, will be in the working drawings, but it'll probably have a knee brace in fitting with this modern farmhouse aesthetic, as we're calling it.
All right. Phyllis, questions for Mr. Harlock?
I'm fine with everything, except I do have,
What's your question for Mr.
my
Harlock?
question is the portico, I'll call it.
Yeah.
It's now approximately 5 feet with the roof of it coming past the post. Is that correct?
It depends how you measure it. The distance from the front door to the inside of the post, what I call the clearance, is 4 feet exactly.
Okay.
The posts, we're saying, are about 8 inches square.
Okay, but it's coming more forward towards the street than the inside line of the post. And I'm asking for the entire light yellow thing. I'm figuring about 5 feet. You're adding about another
It's
foot
about,
on.
it's about 5 feet.
Okay. What problems would be caused if you took it back a foot?
I think the major one would be kind of what I said. It would see, we have this path coming from the driveway. The main entrance is going to be sideways. And if, to me, a 3-foot clearance, which is what you're talking about, we're talking about from the post to the door wall, that feels cramped to me. We had it 6 feet, and, I think at some point it just feels like a tacked-on feature. That's my architectural thought about it.
Because I'm looking at the post, I took a picture when I was up there, and it looks fairly deep in this picture, and also in this photo that I took. Here's another one.
Well, I'm not sure you may be considering the entry plus the porch, but I'm not sure.
In other words, you're saying that the front of the house, as represented by the story poles, is not exactly there in story pole. Is that correct?
Well,
So-
we have accurately represented the front of the
Right.
porch.
Right.
What is this story pole here? What is this story pole? The
If you
one
got a-
that's close to the house.
Doug, have
there
you got
from
a
that
shot
side.
from the other side?
That's the
Or-
front corner.
This is the front corner?
Okay, and from there out is the portico, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
About 5 feet.
And I am wondering if it can go back a foot, and you're saying you don't think so, that it would be too tight, looking at the size of the posts.
I feel so, but that you're the adjudicators. I think as Peter measured, the houses that are the closest and the same setback are 5 and 9. And they are,
Number 5 and number 9.
and they are approximately,
Number 9 is 1210, and number 5, and I'm subtracting the 4 feet there, is 14.6.
And that's to the house, not they don't have a porch, so.
Yeah. Yeah, well, those two don't have porticos. They have the number 5 has an inset porch.
Yes.
I measured to the house.
Right,
And
but
the same on number.
the one that does have the big portico is 15, and that is
That's way out.
20 feet.
It's compliant.
Yeah, it's compliant. It's probably
Right.
one of the few houses on the block, that.
Okay, so what else do you want to?
That would be it. If that, I just feel it's,
I would
I'd still like to see it go back a little bit, but the rest of it
Okay.
is fine.
All right. So at this point, I don't have any questions for you, Mr. Harlock. I feel like I understand your design, and I think it's.
One more thing. My neighbor was here and he left because
Yeah,
the thing ran too long, but everybody on the street is in support of the project. The guy that was here was 25 immediately to my left, so.
okay.
he's the garage.
Yeah, so
You're
I would
lucky.
understand why number 1, or the end would be all right, but your neighbor to this side is not listed in the signature.
I have a letter from her that came after the initial submission. So- Two of the other neighbors.
All right, thank you.
She's the one to the left of it.
All right, so let the record show that we have a letter from Travis Wright at 17 Endeavor Cove, and number 5 Endeavor Cove in your signed format with their signature. So, submitted by the applicant. So with that said, no other questions for the
No.
applicant or the architect at
No.
this point? Okay, so we're closed that section of it. There is no audience here for a public hearing unless Judith would like to. So we will open and close the public hearing of this simultaneously in one breath, and bring it back to the commission to discuss. So this is a project that has required findings for the variance, and the staff has asked us to examine these requirements. The required findings are that there are special circumstances applicable to the property, including size, shape, topography, location, or surroundings that do not generally apply to other properties in the vicinity and identical zone classification. 2, because of these special circumstances, the strict application of title will result in practical difficulty and unnecessary physical hardship and will deprive the property of the privileges enjoyed by other properties in the vicinity under identical zone classification. C, the variance or adjustment or will not constitute a grant of special privileges and is consistent with limitations upon other properties in the vicinity and under identical zone classification. D, number 4, the granting of the variance or adjustment will not be detrimental to the public welfare or material injurious to other property in the vicinity. And E, number 5, the variance is consistent with the objectives of this title and with the general plan. So, the debate is before us. Do we have, an explanation per finding number 2 of the staff report? Explain how the special circumstances will, the strict application of the zoning town ordinance will result in practical difficulty and unnecessary physical hardship, et cetera. So we have to find that these things are all acceptable to us or not, and either continue the hearing or make the findings as described before us. So, with that said, we have to go through this and make sure that the variance is amenable or not to us, that that there is no hardship is acceptable to us. What I'm saying is the hardship can be superseded by a variance granting. So, in other words, it's getting late.
Yeah.
The variance denied would impose a hardship upon the applicant. So if we grant the variance, we are accepting their explanation of a hardship if they don't get the variance. So it's really that simple. Either we can make the findings as necessary or not. So with that said, Nicolo, how do you feel about making the findings or not?
Okay, so I'd like to have a bit of a rational approach, and I'm just going to speak the way it comes out, because it's a little complicated, but I'm going to make it easy, maybe. All right, so first of all, I do agree with staff with all the findings, okay? And then staff, one of the findings kind of stuck. And this is the way I view it. I have two different approaches and views. First of all, I'm going to mention that I'm familiar with the code section 1824.050, which is what you were referring to, which it may not apply 100%, but at least it gives, on the first paragraph, states the front porches may extend 6 feet into the required setback, no more than 6 feet, okay? As I said, this may not apply because we're there's something behind the porch. However, in this circumstance, I feel that it is a porch, but at the same time, if we all agree that the first of the special circumstances, which we all agree, the entry, which is needed, necessary, and makes a lot of sense, and so we all agree that probably that it can be granted. If we if we just stop there, we do not have a covered entryway, okay? Because we're talking about porch. It is a porch, but it's not a livable porch. It's just a transitional area where you can be protected when it's raining, when you come into the house. It's an entryway, realistically. So the way I see it, first of all, is a necessary thing to comply, not to comply, but to be consistent with the rest of the neighborhood, to have a covered walkway outside of his door. And secondly, I lost the thread. And secondly, yeah, secondly, I think it's more of a landscape element. It's not a build, I mean, it is a building, but it serves as a transition from the outside to the inside. So I don't see it as a problem. I don't see it as a building. And therefore, I find the relationship that staff was mentioning between the two of them and making it into one.
Okay, so you're saying then that the hardship can be overcome by the necessity of design?
Absolutely, yes. And then one more thing, the 4 feet and the 5 feet or 6 feet. I do agree also that the post holding the covered walkway is set 4 feet from the wall. So if you, okay, sure, you can move it, but we can see from the drawing, from the post, then there is a little cantilever outside. If you don't want the post to be right on the edge, therefore somehow where it is, then the 4 feet clearance between the post and the wall, it makes sense to move furniture or anything. You don't want 3 feet. So I think that overall the 5 feet, depth, I think is a honest, good dimension. Now, lastly, let's all remember sometime ADA, in this case maybe it wouldn't be necessary, but ADA states that 5 feet is a good landing dimension that, you know, someone with wheelchair can be harbored and protected.
All right, thank you, Nicola.
You're welcome.
Jennifer, your thoughts about being able to grant this variance over that the hardship is sustainable?
Can I ask one question of staff?
Yes.
So because it's a covered porch, it therefore becomes a variance. So let's just say that it wasn't a covered roof structure, but it was open air for whatever reason. Would it then not require a variance?
If it were open.
Yeah, I mean, that's how we read it, but it's also extends more than 6 feet according to that rule. So this is, I think,
The portico component of it, you mean?
the whole component of it extends, it's, you know, there's 9 feet, you could say.
Just the covered?
Sorry, just the covered portico portion is 5 feet, I thought.
Yeah.
And the other portion of it, the additional entry, I can accept the variance because of the stairwell issue, right? And
Right.
that's what staff is recommending. So what we're really focusing
Well,
on,
staff doesn't, I mean, I think staff's view is that the regulation is assuming that you have a complying building. And then off of that building, you can have a deck or a porch extend into the front yard. So you're left with a 14-foot setback if it's uncovered, according to the regulation. It doesn't mean that if you're at, you know, let's say you get the building for hardship reason is now at 6 feet from the sidewalk, that all of a sudden you're allowed then by right another 6 feet for an uncovered deck into that front yard.
understood.
Otherwise, you're right up, you're smack against the sidewalk. So it's not in addition to an already granted variance, you get an additional 6 feet. That's how we would read that section.
Okay. And if this portico was not actually covered, would you then still be suggesting that it was a 9-foot variance, or would you be suggesting it was a
It would be
5-foot,
6,
4-foot
I
variance?
think we'd be at, so
be a
if it was
patio.
uncovered, it would be, you'd go, we would say the maximum you could get under this section would be up to, you'd have a 14-foot setback, whatever that is, from the street.
Okay.
So you could have something out there. I mean, our main, you know, and we went back and forth on this several times, but at the end of the day, it came down to, is that design element, and there were other certain design elements that I think in the prior, especially in the prior case, before it was modified, just felt that they weren't integral to the hardship that was being created by the location of the building on the lot, the topography and all that stuff. Those were design features.
Okay.
And I think from our standpoint, we wanted to make that distinction and at least have the commission discuss it. I think we also understand that there's ways to, if the commission views it as sort of an integral whole and a component, that there's ways that the commission may see that as making that finding, but I think we wanted to have the commission really have that same discussion we were grappling with and let us know, because this will also, as what happens with variances, you know, it's the next, we'll see another one that will be similar, and it'll be a design feature or something like that, and can use guidance from this discussion in the next discussion we have with applicants as well.
Okay. In that case, I do think the revised design, the massing is smaller, and I think it's more appropriate. I'm glad that the covered arbor has also been scaled back, so I can make the findings for this variance, given where the house sits, and we're not going to move it, 4 feet farther to the rear at this point. And I think taking away the covered portico, I think would look not as architecturally interesting or
Okay.
consistent.
So with that said, you would accept it as it is without any other conditions?
I can accept it as
All
it
right.
is.
Dr. Bundy?
I would accept the variance and approve the project as proposed.
All right, thank you. Phyllis?
I would prefer it back another foot, but since it creates a problem design-wise, I'm willing to go along with it.
Right.
And it will be A, B, C, and D.
Okay. So, and I would agree, but I do have reservations, but I don't think they're worth rejecting the application. So I think that this falls on a street that has homes that have other non-conforming fronts, but we don't accept the premise that 2 wrongs make a right. So, it's just that this is it's a dead-end street. And even though I don't like to use that rationale, it's the truth that nobody sees this as a major form of travel. If this were down on Tamwell, Pius, or anywhere else, I don't think we could make these kind of findings and accept overcoming the hardship with accepting the variance. So I will ask for a motion then. Yes.
Just before that, I do want to ask one clarification, because I know we've been looking at these drawings up on the, and they're submitted for the record, but, this is sort of the applicant. There is I'm not sure what's represented by the landscaping out front, if that is actually lawn in this drawing as opposed to what was presented in the application submittal. And I just thought it would be important to have clarification on what is actually being proposed.
Adam, the green is.
Would you step up to the microphone, please? Thank you.
Sorry, I just thought it was important
It
before.
is.
Yeah,
Yeah, it is.
the green was nothing more than just an indication of softscape, that it had nothing to do with the
Okay.
landscape concept plan.
So these drawings are not, they're renderings, they're just for informational purposes. What we'll use are the plans that were submitted for, as exhibits and evidence.
You're with reference to the landscaping, is that?
Everything, just.
Yeah.
Okay, just to highlight an information, make things more clear. Okay.
Yeah, I think the answer is yes. It was just diagrammatic to color it green to give you a sense of how we also cut back on the hardscape. We had a patio under that arbor, that's been eliminated as well.
Okay.
The projecting, the trellis projection.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for bringing that up, Adam. I think that we're looking at the renderings as color renderings attached, and it shows lawn naked out there.
Yeah.
There's nothing else. So it's not really a landscape plan then that's submitted with this.
Well, it's on the plan.
There is one on the plan.
That's right.
That's what I want to make sure that we're going with what's on that plan.
There was no attempt in the perspectives to convey the landscaping.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Got it. All right, so that's the controlling document.
Right. I got that.
Okay, so, do we hear a motion for this project as proposed, or ask, at this point, we would ask staff to prepare a resolution for us to vote on at the next meeting?
Are we going to do the findings of variances under number 2? We've just done number 1.
Well, I think that,
Could
yes,
we
you
do
have
them
to,
both at once?
I find that, let's hear what you have to say about those variances.
I can accept them,
Yeah.
but I just would like to see us do it as one motion instead of two if we all agree on this.
We're just asking staff to prepare a resolution for us, but we are making taking a vote for that fact. So, and in this case, the findings for number 2, for off-street parking or off-street loading, would be a part of that. We would be accepting that group of findings.
Right. So all of the findings
Yes.
listed under 1 and 2.
Thank you.
Okay.
So with that said, is there such a motion?
I can make the motion if you guys want. I just need some help because I didn't understand how.
We're asking staff to prepare a resolution, but we're saying that we would make the findings for approval, and that staff prepares the resolution for us.
So
Yes.
what Mr. Chase said.
Got it.
See, you shouldn't have volunteered.
Second. That's good enough.
Thank you.
Anybody else over here?
Second.
Say second.
All right. Commissioner Metcalf.
Aye.
Commissioner Bundy.
Aye.
Commissioner Chase.
Aye.
Commissioner Friedman.
Aye.
Commissioner Caldera.
Aye.
Great.
All right.
Rummy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for being patient.
I have 3 minutes.
So did I, Michael, so did I.
Okay, so,
It's a few minutes before 11, so we've got 2 choices, Peter.
yeah,
We can have a vote to extend the meeting to 11:30, if there's a second, because it's done in half-hour intervals, or we can decide to just adjourn.
all right. So, somebody make a motion to one or the other decisions here. Either we adjourn in 3 minutes, or we continue to 11:30.
I move we adjourn in 3 minutes.
I second it.
I second it. Third.
That would mean we would continue the business items and essentially,
Yeah.
We can get down real quick.
What?
You said 3 minutes. We got
3 minutes, all right. So, does anyone have any, let's say this, does anyone have any comments on item 6, the business items, the consideration of revisions to the 2015 Planning Commission rules and procedures?
I would just like to say that I would have great difficulty making the meeting at 7 because I have meetings with clients out of town. I think as long as we adhere, and as I let Bob know, as long as we adhere to 3.2.3, how to adjourn the meeting and don't allow ourselves to be pulled into 12, 1 o'clock meetings, we're fine. It's not when we start it, it's when we finish it that's the
All right.
problem.
So then that would be your modification to the rules.
There would be no modification, it would leave the rules as
Is in that
as
particular.
is when it comes to time.
So item 3.2, we would leave at 7:30 PM instead of 7 PM.
Yeah, well, 3.2, you're right,
All right.
because you can see when we have long meetings how rummy we get, or at least I do when I'm drinking
Was
water.
3.2.3 always part of it, and it just wasn't
Yes.
adhered to?
Yeah,
Okay. But we're gonna adhere to
when I
more
put
to
it
that.
together last year, and we were not going beyond 11 o'clock,
Got
so
it.
it kind of
It wasn't
got lost.
an issue.
It seems like everybody in town wants to do something lately. I think because the economy's changed.
So can we then, if there's no other modifications, we would propose to adopt these rules and recommend them to the town council?
As we did last time.
Yeah, and just for clarification, we did make some modifications at the last meeting. This was going to be in addition to that.
Right.
If we're not going to change the meeting time, we will just go with the previous
Iteration.
Right.
changes that were approved by the commission at the last meeting, and we'll take that to the council at the next council meeting.
I move we approve the previous iteration of the changes and move it to the town council.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, that's everyone.
And I will call you in the next day or so to show you how you show it on it, how, where it's revised. Remember, we discussed, because it's better, but it's still not.
All right, so that said, we would look at adjourning the meeting at this point and continue any other items.
Move to adjourn?
Second.
So moved.